Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, August 21st. We will begin this meeting with a roll call.
Commissioner Ackerman. Commissioner Briggs.
Here.
Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here.
Commissioner Mills.
Here.
Commissioner Milstein.
Here.
Commissioner Sauvé.
Here.
Commissioner Trudeau. Commissioner Weatherby.
Here.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Almost a full house and a quorum.
Great, thank you. Before us, we have the agenda for this evening. Do I have a commissioner that will move the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Ackerman, seconded by Commissioner Mills. Do we have any discussion or changes to the agenda for the evening? Seeing no one, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? It's approved. Moving on to introductions. Do we have any introductions this evening?
Nope.
Okay. Moving on to minutes of previous meeting. We don't have any minutes for our approval this evening. And then on to reports from City Administration, City Council, Planning Manager, Planning Commission officers and committees, and written communications and petitions. We'll begin with our City Council representative, Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, because of the timing of this council meeting and our previous Planning Commission meeting, I do not have an update at this meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Leonard, do you have a report for us?
No report, but a quick update to the audience. We have two methods of capturing your information when you speak during any public hearings. We would ask you to either sign in on the sheet at the podium, or in advance you can fill out one of these handy dandy little forms and just drop them in the basket. You don't need to have signed up before to speak during a public hearing. We had some questions about that prior to the meeting this evening. And you only have to do one or the other. If you've already dropped your name in a basket, you don't have to do it again.
Thank you. Are there any reports from Planning Commission officers and committees? Seeing none. We'll move on to written communication. In our packet, we received quite a bit of written communication, so please take a look at that. And then moving on to audience participation. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to an item that is not listed on our agenda or any of our hearings this evening? So if there's anyone who's here not to speak about an item that we'll be discussing later on this evening, please step up to the podium, sign in, state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to talk. Seeing no one. This is in regards to something that is not on our agenda. Seeing no one, I will move on to public hearings scheduled for the next business meeting.
For the next business meeting of September 5th, we have 3 public hearings scheduled. 617 Packard, a special exception use permit and site plan for City Planning Commission approval for a medical marijuana provisioning center. We have for 3720 Washtenaw Avenue, a site plan and special exception use permit application for Planning Commission approval for a medical marijuana provisioning center. And then for 2861 Stone School Road, a requested annexation and zoning for City Council approval. Request to annex a 0.96 acre parcel containing a single family home from Pittsfield Township for R1C zoning. And then we anticipate a returning item as well on September 5th, which is the Lockwood Senior Housing Development.
Sounds like a full meeting for us. All right, so moving on to unfinished business. The first item under unfinished business is Rainbow Child Care Center, 2600 Nixon Road, special exemption use for City Planning Commission approval and site plan for City Council approval. And we will begin with Mr. Leonard.
Yeah, I just want to give an introduction for the members of the audience and the Planning Commission. Previously, a special exception use permit was granted by the Planning Commission for this property, as it's required for a child care center in this zoning district. And at the time, there was specific discussion and specific reliance upon traffic circulation component to this child care center being able to access, leave the site and enter the site from by 2 directions along Clegg Drive. Subsequent to that approval, it was made clear that the petitioner's property has an easement access over Clegg Drive for the westernmost curb cut that was proposed, but not to the extent of the eastern. And that as that is not a public road, it wouldn't be appropriate for us as the city to rely on that access without the appurtenant private arrangement for access according. And because of that specific reliance on the circulation in two direction, it is suitable to reconsider that special exception use and the appropriate standards to make sure that either A, it still meets the requirements of the special exception use from the Planning Commission perspective, no longer does, or if you need additional information. So I just wanted to set that overview as why it's returning to you for your consideration.
Thank you. And we will begin with the staff report. Mr. Kowalski.
I'll just give kind of a brief overview. As indicated, this plan was before you previously, October 2007. So here we go for a question of zoning. Subject site is zoned R1C. Corner of Nixon and Bush, very near the corner, but on Nixon, north of Bush. You from the aerial photo here, photograph of the building, which is now currently. Survey the existing site as it stands today. Obviously, the existing former church building on there as well as currently out of the parking lot. Again, so as Mr. Leonard explained, the site plan's back before you tonight. The changes of Thank you. Changes of circulation. That helps a little bit. All right, changes of circulation. So the plan is back before you tonight. There are a couple of changes worth pointing out. Obviously, the most notable is the change to the circulation. The easternmost drive, as you can see on the map before you here, was previously indicated, as we said, as a full in and out access drive. That, as shown on this plan, is blocked off. There would be a gate proposed at that intersection or that driveway specific for no use of that section of Clegg Drive. The fire marshal has looked at, they've also proposed, so one of the issues with this was making sure that there's adequate fire circulation as well as the other reviews that are required anytime a site plan goes through reviews. We send it back through all our departments. One issue that has developed was regarding the fire truck access and making sure that they have adequate area to turn around and access the site. That has been addressed as well. We have a modified access plan here that was just submitted and a preliminary review of it conducted by the fire marshal just today. And she's indicated that she would accept this. Now this, again, has not been fully reviewed through the rest of our staff. If it is approved tonight, it would be contingent upon approval of this plan. They would have to submit the full site plan sheet, go through the full review process. The only thing that really changes on here, however, there is a slight increase of, well, not necessarily impervious surface. They're going to do some turnaround areas here with a brick paver system, so it is mostly a pervious system, and there's a little additional area over here for the fire truck to turn around completely. A couple of other, really the only other notable changes were at the direction of Planning Commission. They have previous, it shows up better on here, a couple of the issues that were mentioned at the last Planning Commission meeting were regarding possibly adding additional bicycle parking, even in an paved area that would allow for possible bike trailers and things like that if people are biking there and leaving their child there, and they can leave their trailer there as well. That area has been added into this section right here where the previous bicycle parking was already located there, and they've basically expanded that area to accommodate additional bicycles and trailers, as I said. The other improvement or the other change to the plan at direction of Planning Commission is they are previously proposing to remove a rather large mulberry tree, a multi-stemmed mulberry. It was not a landmark tree. However, it was of substantial nature and size that it was a concern to adjacent residents as well as Planning Commission. So they have the plan that actually proceeded to the City Council last April, I believe it was, did have these changes on there. There is also a slight adjustment to the solid waste area as a result of this plan. But again, those changes will be reviewed if the plan goes forward after tonight. The plan would be submitted in full and reviewed by all city staff. And that really summarizes up the changes at this time. And staff is still recommending approval of the plan. Thank you. And special exception use.
Yeah, I just, excuse me, I just want to add a note to emphasize, as planning staff, we had made the assumption about fire access being appropriate in that gated access on an emergency-only basis. And just to clarify, generally, obviously, emergency response vehicles typically can go where they need to go to respond to emergency. That's quite different than us considering a plan that has a physical reliance on another private property for some aspect of that emergency response. In this case, a turnaround. The turnaround being required because the length of that parking lot exceeds a requirement for being able to back a fire truck out of it. So upon that reliance, and you'll see this reflected in the staff report, ultimately, in order to approve a plan that relied on any sort of gate access, if even only for turnaround of a fire truck in the event of an emergency, would require the appropriate easement or access to make sure that was enabled, as it's an arrangement between two private properties. In this case, that turnaround accommodation can be fully accommodated within the petitioner's site. So I just want to add a little bit more background to that discussion.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing for anyone in the public who wishes to address the Planning Commission. When you come up, please state your name for the record and your address. Please sign in or fill in one of the cards. If you fill in one of the cards, that will prompt us to notify you if this petition has been delayed or tabled, to be notified of that when it comes back to us.
On either sign-in.
Actually, on either sign-in. So please feel free to sign in any of these. Anyone here can address the Planning Commission for 3 minutes. The petitioner or any organized neighborhood group, that individual has 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I'll take the 5 minutes. My name is Joan Lowenstein with Jaffe, Raitt, Hewer & Weiss, and represent the petitioner. The bottom line of this is that nothing has changed since the Planning Commission granted special exception use last October. This is an appropriate site for daycare. Ann Arbor needs more daycare options, especially for infants, which this would do. There are many young families moving into the neighborhoods, especially just north of here. There is no adverse impact and no change in impact. The church at this site operated a preschool for many years, held church services and events, hosted AA meetings there. There's minimal traffic impact, and you can see that from the traffic reports. Unlike the school that has rush hours, daycare traffic dribbles in and dribbles out. Much of the drop-off traffic is before school begins at Clegg, and most of the pickup traffic is after school is out. So why are we here? For 45 years, there's been an easement agreement between the church and the schools regarding the eastern driveway. In 2007, a second easement, described as a permanent easement that runs with the land, was established for the western driveway for traffic going in and out from Nixon Road, and that easement incorporated the eastern driveway easement. The petitioner purchased the church property more than a year ago, submitted the site plan, notified nearby neighbors, including the schools, and the site plan proceeded without objection. Exactly 1 year ago, I wrote to the Ann Arbor Public Schools attorney to request a utility easement so we could bore under Clegg Street for sewer. I didn't hear anything at all from the schools until January, just before the site plan was coming up before the city council in February, which was the first that we knew that the schools objected to our reliance on a 45-year-old easement that the church had used continuously all those years. In fact, just about everybody has used Clegg Street all these years because there's no gate arm at Blewett or Nixon, and most people probably think it's a public street. So at the city council meeting, school representatives spoke at the public hearing, which we thought was not going to happen that night, and I'm sorry to say, were untruthful in saying that they had just found out about this project. They were also untruthful in saying that there were safety concerns because there is no documented evidence of any safety issue that will be caused by this daycare center. And I have gone through pages and pages of minutes from the School City Transportation Safety Committee meetings from the past year, and there is only one mention of Clegg School, and that is a complaint by police that parents from Clegg School are parking in the crosswalk when they go to pick up their children. We offered to provide payment to the schools for use of an easement that we believe we already purchased, but were turned down by the schools, and instead they are now essentially saying that they will now not even allow emergency use of that easement. So if a building full of toddlers is in danger, the Ann Arbor Public Schools will not allow a city fire truck to enter or exit out of the 45-year-old easement onto a so-called private street that is actually owned by a public entity funded by your and my tax dollars. In fact, since everyone can now use Clegg Street, the clients of the daycare will be the only people who are banned from using it, except for the narrow area near Nixon. We have accommodated that. It does not change the minimal traffic impact, and there is no legal or logical reason to change this commission's decision to grant special exception use and approve the site plan. And we have our team here for questions when you begin your deliberations, our traffic engineer, and the principal of the builder from the petitioner.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here this evening and present to you all, esteemed Planning Commission. My name is Christine Stead. I'm currently the president of the Ann Arbor Public Schools Board of Education. I am here tonight to speak to you about the concerns we've received from the school's perspective about the incremental traffic that will be inherent and obvious with putting a child daycare center. Currently, we have a church, so the traffic for that is mostly on the weekends. It does not really ever conflict with the amount of traffic we have coming in and out of our Clegg Middle School property. We do have other families here this evening that live there that can speak to you about how already a lot of traffic is in that area. So adding 130 children coming and going at, I would argue, having been a mother with 2 children that went to daycare, there are certain hours that are more likely than others where people are dropping children off and picking them up. And those are directly, and these are common sense things, they're directly in conflict or in complement, if you will, with school traffic. These will be in the morning and they'll be in the afternoon. That's exactly the same time our kids at Clegg Middle School are coming and going. It's fairly obvious. So if you're relying on what you have put in your documentation here in terms of why special exceptions use standard, I think Ms. Lowenstein said it nicely, that the bottom line is nothing has changed here. The same concerns we had, and I can tell you when I became aware of it, I can only speak to that. That was January, so that's an accurate statement from me, the president of the board. I can't speak to when every staff member of our school district was made aware, but I can represent myself. Number 2, you say it will be designed, constructed, operated, and maintained in a manner that is compatible with the existing and planned character of the general facility. Right now we have a church in that area. It may be zoning fairly correct, but in terms of the level of activity that this introduces, it's quite different. Number 3, that it will be of similar activity. 3, and several of these numbers, 3, 4, 5, when we think about just a common sense approach to the kind of traffic activity that this will create, I think it's fairly straightforward that you should anticipate a direct conflict in that kind of traffic. My biggest concern is the safety of our children and our families that get in and out of that facility in a safe manner. I think you share that concern with the overall community that you serve. So hopefully we can work together to come up with something that protects the people that live there, protects our children primarily, and that's our primary concern with this plan. So we would hope that you would look at the foundational elements of the special use exception and recognize that some of these things are in fact incorrect. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the Planning Commission?
Good evening. My name is Bhavan L. My concern with the Rainbow Child Care Center has to do with the safety of our children because of the increased traffic that it will contribute along the Nixon Road corridor. I have a student, I've had now 2 students at Clegg Middle School that walk to school. Staff recommended approval of the special exception use because they argued it would not have a detrimental effect on public health, safety, or welfare, nor would it unduly conflict with the normal traffic pattern of the neighborhood. I don't understand how this conclusion was reached, and I hope that the approval of a special exception use would have a higher bar for approval when it is co-located with the school facility. How many of you are parents? You don't have to answer, obviously, but just think about this. Put yourself in our shoes. How many of you have dropped off your children at school? Maybe your school's traffic patterns are better than what we have in our neighborhood schools, but let me tell you, in our schools, there are traffic jams. High densities of cars interacting with neighborhood kids walking to school is a dangerous mix that we should seek to alleviate, not to intensify. This is just common sense. How can adding a daycare facility for 130 kids do anything but intensify the traffic and reduce the safety of our children? My second objection to the special use exception has already been mentioned, and that has to do with the conclusion that the new development is consistent with the existing use. So again, somehow the staff report justified this conclusion by saying that the structure that it will replace, a church, is of a similar activity. Again, please use common sense. How is a church, with its primary use on the weekends or perhaps weekday evenings, of a similar activity to a daycare facility, whose primary use overlaps with an already traffic-intensive period from 7 o'clock to 9 p.m.? Finally, I'm new to this. This is the first time I've taken the time to read like a report for a special exception use, a site plan report. But it struck me that we have our priorities misaligned. There was no mention of the impact of safety of children walking to school. There was much more detail about which trees would be preserved, including notes that a large mulberry, which was mentioned earlier, would be preserved. Now, I'm passionate about the environment. I'm a fisheries biologist. I work on the Great Lakes. I love that Ann Arbor preserves its green space, its natural areas in our parks. But when the staff report pays more attention to preserving a mulberry bush than preserving the safety of our children that walk to this neighborhood school, then we've lost our perspective on what is most important in development decisions. Please use common sense. Please reject this proposal. There are much better places in Northeast Ann Arbor for rainbow childcare to be built than along the Nixon Road corridor on the same campus as Clague Middle School. Thank you.
Thank you. And if everyone can please say your name and address for the record, that'd be great.
Hi, I'm Denise Swift, the Superintendent of Schools, 201 South 1st Street, Ann Arbor, 48104. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening, and thank you for your work on this matter. I'm here on behalf of the safety of the students in Clague Middle School and Thurston Elementary neighborhoods, and on behalf of the Ann Arbor Public Schools to share our concern about the development of the Rainbow Child Care Center. As you're aware, this site is immediately adjacent to Clague Middle School, 675 students enrolled there, and is in close proximity to Logan Elementary School with 350 additional students there. So you can see with more than 1,000 students and their families already moving in transit to and from school each day in this immediate vicinity, the area is highly congested with traffic and pedestrian activity. And in fact, as my team well knows, this area has been a hot spot in the district and one that we've been vigilantly working to refine and improve student, pedestrians, bike, and traffic safety. In the past years, as you well know, a church occupied the site. As the church usage did not conflict with school days and hours, the agreement that we have had has been acceptable. Unfortunately, a continued arrangement with increases specific to morning and afternoon drop-off and pickup is very concerning to us around student safety. In the Ann Arbor Public Schools, student safety is our due north. It is our top priority, even before our critical mission of teaching and learning. And so we continue to be concerned about the safety issues associated with any increase in the volume of traffic that we anticipate will be associated with these facilities. I have to share with you, as superintendent, in light of previous incidents that have resulted in injury and death to children due to traffic in Ann Arbor around our campuses, we hold an especially critical concern that extends far beyond the work that you have to do with plats and maps and those kinds of important details. Our consideration is most unfortunately that we speak from recent and tragic experience, and so we are even more deeply committed to our efforts to hold student and pedestrian safety as our top priority. So as a result, we will champion the cause of student safety, and I will share with you that we've directed our attorneys to take any and all actions necessary to enjoin and prohibit increases in burdening of the easement. Thank you for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Margaret Baker. I live at 3271 Volgo Circle in the Chapel Hill condominiums. I'm also president of the Clegg Middle School PTSO. Once again, I feel the Planning Commission is pushing this forward at a time when there are very few people in town. We learned about this right before Christmas. It was very difficult to get to know everyone, to let everyone know what was happening. Of course, the neighborhood was very concerned. And I found out about this driving back from Massachusetts, that this had come back up again. So quickly we mobilized all of our people. It frustrates me that you want to work with a child care center that seems to have so little concern for the children and families that are already living in this area. You've heard some of the arguments and you know that they're very real. And as you said, Ms. Lowenstein said that she did contact the schools, and I believe she may have, but I know because I work closely with Mr. Che Carter, he was not aware of any of this. He is the principal of Clegg, and really responsible for a lot of the growth that's happening. People love him. He had no idea this was happening. He learned about it from us, which is not the way things should happen. As far as some of the points in the special exception use, I concur that the proposed center is not at all consistent with the general character of the neighborhood. According to the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers, the Trip Generation Manual, there will be an additional 90 cars every morning between 7 and 9 a.m. 90 more cars. Do the math, that's roughly a car a minute. It takes a lot more than a minute to drop off a preschooler safely. That is just unacceptable. In addition to the already overwhelming traffic volume that is there and is likely to increase because of the Duvarin developments, you must surely recognize that. Second, there is no way that this center is of similar activity. My children actually attended the preschool that was there. It was a very small school. I think at most there are about 35 children. And it was pretty much of a 9 to 12 kind of a place back in the old days when children were dropped off long after the Clegg drop-off. Many of us walked or biked there as well. It just simply was not at all the same type of business that is going. So Rainbow's claim in the special exception use that this is of similar activity is patently false. And finally, the petitioner states that Clegg Street should act as a stacking area, I'm quoting, for traffic entering onto Nixon Road, minimizing traffic backup. This is ludicrous. It is already a hazardous stacking area. Adding 90 more cars in that 2-hour period is very, very dangerous. This little corner is not the place for a child care center. I agree, we need child care. We're very happy people are moving to Ann Arbor. They need to take care of their babies. But this little corner is simply not the place for a corporate structure. Rainbow has thrived in all of their areas that are mostly on thoroughfares, highways with much easier access and much more parking. Should this center go through, and shame on all of you if it does, may this letter serve as Exhibit A in a lawsuit that will certainly ensue when a child is hit or worse as a result of this ill-advised center. You were duly warned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Praveen Aramis. I live at 2831 Renfrew Street. I live on the corner of Blewett. I have a child who went to Clegg and a child that's going to be using Clegg for high school. So they will go, or she will go early in the morning to go to school and have to cross to go to Clegg to get her high school bus to Huron. And then I have a Clegg student going in next year. Last 3 years, my child has had issues crossing the street from Blewett to Clegg, which is literally a small street. She's had cars drive around her when she's in the middle of the street. I've had parents call me saying she's been nearly hit because they can see from her house, and I'm not the only parent that sees this or has this reported. We've even talked to the school office at Clegg, and they say they get this report constantly. With the increase of traffic on Blewett and then all the developments coming on Nixon, there's a double increase in traffic. Additionally, if you ever come to the school during school drop-off or pickup times, you will see a backup all the way down Blewett, all the way down Nixon, and it is almost a standstill for minutes. So if a child can't cross the street now, if I'm in a neighborhood just across one small neighborhood street, I can't imagine having 90 more, if it's 90, if it's 130 kids plus staff. You could have a new additional road come in, but I'm going to tell you, when a parent for that child care center comes in, they won't know which road is they're supposed to use and which is Clegg Street, which is the one that goes on to Blewett. People in our neighborhood are very concerned. We of course want daycare facilities. We think daycares are great, but not this location. Until the issue of traffic is addressed in this area, I think you should consider holding back or thinking about this a little bit further. We need to think about the safety of our children getting to school every morning. And our neighborhood is turning over. We are getting a lot more children. Clegg has become very popular, and so is Logan and Thurston. So we're seeing more and more children, which is wonderful, but we need to also be aware and prepare for this, for traffic safety for our kids to cross the street. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Linda Riley, and I live at 2512 Traver Boulevard in Ann Arbor, 48105. Well, I'm one of the people that has lived in this area for 28 years, and I'm seeing a lot of traffic increase. As you've heard tonight, we have Logan Elementary School, and as a school of choice, we have a lot of cars, both 2 times a day for drop-off and pickup, as well as the buses that go in. Clegg Middle School, of course, with the buses and students crossing Nixon. We have one crossing guard, and I feel for him already because it's an almost impossible view to see everything coming from many directions. We have Gretchen's house, which is on Traver Boulevard, and that's a daycare, as you well know, that's already getting a lot of business. And then we have the housing development, including Toll Brothers, and additional condominiums and development coming from the north of Nixon. We're lucky to also have AATA buses, and I also feel for the AATA bus driver as I'm sitting trying to go right on Nixon out of Traver. The AATA bus is trying to head north, and it's currently very difficult at particular hours of the day, particularly the 8 a.m. kind of time, and this is summer. I usually look forward to school starting because I am a retired educator, but quite frankly, I don't look forward to having this congestion, and I do feel for, and I'm concerned for, the safety of the young people in our community. I do feel that, as I heard recently expressed at a city council meeting when I was watching it, it's like a city has been dropped on Northeast Ann Arbor, and we really aren't prepared to handle all of the traffic that we're seeing in this particular corridor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jack Cedarquist. I live at 2145 Ardennes Drive. I'm the president of the board of the Orchard Hills Maplewood Homeowners Association. We have 550 homes in this area, right, a lot of which are on Blewett, for example, and nearly adjoining this property. I guess people are making good points. I'll make just 2 points. One is, I believe that additional uses like this that might be approved should look toward the people who live right around, no matter where in town, you should look toward the residents who live around that area and see how they feel about the change essentially in their backyards. And so far, well, we'll see when the comment time closes, but so far we haven't had anybody that I know of who lives in the area speaking in favor of this. And that's mostly because in this area, we already know that we have a traffic problem on Nixon. We have a traffic problem on Blewett. The city has and continuing to do studies on traffic on Nixon. There was a traffic calming study, which I don't think is quite finished for Blewett. There have been other proposals. I've heard, I can't verify this, I've heard that the public schools might be trying to change the way in which you access Clegg, because right now that is a mess, and we do have people parking illegally on Blewett trying to pick up and drop off their kids. And I read the most recent report on this, at least as of posted today, and I noticed that the report that Matt and Brett here signed, I noticed they say that they certainly did not prefer a new access point for this child care center from Nixon. But it seems to me that that's more or less what we're getting, because by closing off that eastern entrance, how are people going to get to this western entrance? Even if there is some right-of-way agreement that still exists, they're either going to have to come in the main Clegg entrance, which I think is, I hope everyone could agree is probably a bad idea. So if they don't do that, they're going to come in and off of Nixon Road, which is exactly what the city's own traffic engineers are saying is not a good idea. It's true, it's an existing entrance and exit from Nixon. It's not a new cut, but it's just 40 feet away from the point of view of a car that's trying to turn on or off. It really amounts to the same thing. So it seems to me that city staff has actually provided an argument against approving this. And it will be just for sure what's going to happen is it's going to be really hard if people dropping their children off and picking their people up, if they want to make left turns if they're southbound on Nixon and they want to make a left turn to get to the child care center, or when they're leaving, they want to make a left turn, say, to go into town. There's just a constant stream of traffic on Nixon. They're going to start backing up. The parking lot of the child care center is literally going to fill up with cars waiting one at a time for their gap. So I'll be very interested to hear your discussion of all these points as we go forward here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mark Saber. I live at 2666 Sheffman Terrace, which is the street immediately across from Clegg School on the Blewett side. As you already heard, the traffic in this area is horrendous already. Like you said, there's traffic studies. They were talking about doing something with Nixon Road, but that is years away. There's no money appropriated for that or anything. Back to some of the points. First of all, to Dr. Swift's point about safety. One of the things you have to factor in about all these people trying to get around here is in the winter, 7 to 8 o'clock in the morning is pitch black. So you're now going to have all these pedestrians and cars trying to get around in the dark. That adds to the whole safety thing that I don't think anyone has thought about. 1. 2, when you look at the site plan and all this stuff, and Jack alluded to this a little bit, is what you're going to have is you're going to have people trying to leave from the western entrance of this daycare center, and they're going to try and turn left off of Clegg Street onto Nixon. That is a disaster. Nixon is already backed up at that time of the day, and it's backed up at school time at 3 o'clock, and it's backed up at 5 o'clock at night. So all the times when someone will be trying to drop off or pick up a kid from the daycare center is when the traffic is going to be the worst. And to Ms. Lowenstein's point, you're going to have a situation where as any of you who are parents, we've all discussed this. I've got 2 kids. They went to school at Clegg. You're running in the morning, and you're running late. You're trying to get your kid to daycare and then get yourself to work. And so there's going to be people that are going to start to do crazy things trying to make turns. One of the things they're going to do is, even though you're closing that east entrance, they're going to go out the west entrance, turn right on the Clegg Street, come around the Clegg driveway at a time when there's already a ton of traffic, and try and turn onto Blewett and go one way on Blewett and one or the other ways on Blewett, and add to the traffic on Blewett, which is already horrendous. So you're just making the traffic worse, and that closing that gate isn't going to solve your problem. Now, I do have 2 options on how you can fix this and still have the daycare center there. One is in the proposal, and it's just a proposal for the Nixon Road corridor, is there's supposed to be a series of traffic circles. There's not scheduled to be one at Clegg Street. If you can figure out how to move one there, you could alleviate some of this traffic problem. That's one option. The other option is that same thing, the Nixon Road corridor thing, is there's a discussion about turning it into a boulevard where you can't make left turns, and you have to do the go up and come around thing. You could do either of those things. Both of those options are extremely expensive. If you do choose to go down on those paths, you have to pose a condition, and they have to pay for it.
Thank you.
Hi, Liz Margolis, 1389 King George Boulevard. I'm also the Executive Director of Student and School Safety for the Ann Arbor Public Schools. My responsibilities encompass the district's top priority, as Dr. Swift said, and that's the safety of our students. As proposed, the Rainbow Child Care site plan still includes the use of Clegg Street, a private road, as the main entry and exit point for the child care facility. The high volume of traffic expected with this development, especially in the morning, will directly collide with student and staff arrival by car and bus off the Nixon Road entrance onto Clegg Street. As our student enrollment increases, we are seeing pressure points across the district, including at Clegg and Logan, to the extent that we are making drop-off and pickup changes to address safety issues. The location of this child care facility will create additional traffic pressures on Clegg Street that will be borne by our families and student walkers and bikers. This is a clear safety concern. As we stated, the easement that was granted to the church that sat on this property was intended for Sunday use. Use of this easement on weekdays was never the intent and will create safety hazards for our students. Especially noted is the number of middle school students who cross Nixon Road each morning and afternoon. The number of walkers, bikers, and students who take the AAATA to school each day requires us to place a crossing guard at this location. This is the only middle school location that has a crossing guard. And while the crossing guard is really skilled at what he does, I have witnessed many incidents of cars not stopping for crossing students who now have additional traffic to deal with turning into and driving on Clegg Street. For the safety of our students, I ask that this motion be reconsidered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Clark Chernesky. I live at 2646 Traver Boulevard. It's a townhouse directly across the street from this proposed child care center. On your screen, it'll be at the bottom of the screen. I've lived there for over 40 years, almost as long as Clegg and the church have been there. I believe that the use child care center fits in with the neighborhood. We have Clegg School, Logan School, Gretchen's House Child Care Center, so this would be very much compatible with the neighborhood. And we've been told that there's need for more child care within Ann Arbor. The one thing to keep in mind is that the Clegg School traffic is only about 10 or 15 minutes in the morning, 10 or 15 minutes in the middle of the afternoon. Otherwise, there's very little traffic going into or out of the school. So parents who have children at that school would learn very quickly, don't go there during the time the school buses are there. The structure itself is much more attractive than what I look at now, which is a bare brick wall with, it looks like a couple air conditioners in it, so it would be an improvement in the character for Nixon Road. The access to using Clegg Street, I think, is much better than trying to put another access point there. So I agree with the staff in that regard, and I don't see that that should be that much of a problem. Right now, the way things are laid out, children wanting to go across Nixon Road can walk right down the sidewalk along Clegg Street. They then have a crossing guard who helps them across the street going both directions. They do not have to cross Clegg Street itself. They only have to cross Nixon Road with the help of a crossing guard. Also, this proposal is on 2 bus routes, number 22 and number 23. So it makes it convenient for those parents wanting to use the daycare center who do not have an automobile. The other thing to think about is what else might be used, might this property be used for, if not a child care center? And what kind of traffic would that have? Or is the school willing to buy that property so that they don't have to worry about it at all? I've lived there a long time, especially since I've been retired. I've watched the traffic and the buses and everything go in and out, and I believe this use is very compatible, and I have no connection at all with the developer of the schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bob McGill Jr. I'm an attorney. My office is at 455 East Eisenhower, right next to the Olive Garden. I know you've all been to the Olive Garden, so next time stop up and see me. I represent 2 of the neighbors here, the Vizintaners, who live at the corner of Renfrew and Blewett. Most of the points that I wanted to make have already been made by the people here, and they already are contained in the memorandum which I gave to the planning staff this morning. I hope it's all in your packet. Because it has a lot of very interesting exhibits, which I think would help you in your decision here. I just want to make a few points. My memorandum talks about the genesis of the easement and elaborates some legal points, which I think you ought to take into account. I'm not going to go through those today. My clients are not objecting to the activity. Daycare is a good activity. It's just a location, and the location is what we're worried about because the issue is safety. The application, secondly, the application and its traffic study, and the comments, or lack thereof, by the planning staff illustrate, I think, abundantly Mark Twain's remarks about statistics. There's a lot of statistics there, but there's no eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony is competent material and substantial evidence. And you're hearing it today from the people here who are eyewitnesses. Also, you ought to hear from the crossing guard. I believe he would testify, though I haven't heard him say so myself, but I've heard other people tell me what he said, that the traffic there at Nixon Road is already dangerous. It's not a good idea, he would say, to add more to it. And Exhibit 9 to my memorandum, which you have, shows the very problems on Blewett Road. Here are kids crossing, and one of them is practically having his knee knocked off by a car trying to pull out from the side of the road. This is the stuff that speaks, not the numbers that are crunched by the traffic simulation. Software and simulation are not sufficient evidence to support this project. Finally, I was going to go through all the standards and point out how 7 of the 10 standards aren't met, but I'll just mention one right now. Number 4, the project will in fact be detrimental to the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. Just look at my photos in my memorandum, hear the testimony here. The petitioner's own traffic study, which they bought and paid for, estimated 500 new vehicular trips a day. That's because every trip in means a trip out, all right? So there's 500, that's what they recommended, 500 trips. That's going to be added to what is already there. Adding that many trips is not good for traffic, and it's certainly not good for safety. And safety is the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cathy Griswold, 3565 Fox Hunt Drive. I was recently elected to council, and while campaigning, it gave me an excellent opportunity to talk to thousands of people. And the question I have for you tonight is, what happened to government for the people? We don't seem to have government for the people. And that is one of the themes that I heard over and over again at the doors and also at recent meetings. For background, I was a transportation safety consultant for the school district in 2001. I am intimately familiar with every school and every walk zone in the Ann Arbor Public Schools. And I can tell you that the very worst place to put a corporate daycare center is the location that you see here. We have major problems in Ann Arbor with our crosswalks not being uniform, crosswalks missing signage, crosswalks without markings. I could go on and on. We have a crisis right now in terms of pedestrian safety. We've had a crisis in terms of student safety that led to a fatality. I think it is imperative that this commission listens to the public and looks at the bigger picture of what's happening in our community. We want government for the people. We deserve government for the people, and we are not getting it today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the Planning Commission in regards?
Hi, I'm Cathy Stroud. I'm a resident in Ann Arbor, 49 years, and I live at 2271 Placid Way. This is my neighborhood, and this is a neighborhood. I want to refer you, to the staff report, the proposed City Planning Commission. Your motion tonight, number 2, says the proposed use has adequate access to Nixon Road. This is not an accurate statement. I could go into the details. Many of you know, especially staff, that there are proposals, perhaps building as soon as 2019, to put 5 more roundabouts on Nixon Road, which already has 2 new roundabouts. That's 7 roundabouts. You can call them traffic circles if you want. I call them squeeze-abouts because they're not really roundabouts. But the thinking is not consistent. Do you understand that the purpose of a roundabout or a traffic circle is to keep traffic moving? Keep traffic moving. We do not want to keep traffic moving in front of Clegg School, in front of Thurston School, in front of this possible proposed daycare center. This is a residential area. And you are talking about a business coming in now, which would be one of the few businesses in this area. I'm talking about a 1-mile piece of Nixon Road. And I don't know how staff can, at one meeting recommend 7 roundabouts to keep traffic moving, and at another meeting, recommend a gate so that the fire truck can turn around. I have 52 seconds. You please, members of the Planning Commission, amend the proposal tonight at least. The center will support a maximum of 70 children, because Gretchen's across the street. That's how many are at Gretchen's daycare center. I understand the dichotomy here. I'm trying to make a proposal to say, if you're going to vote for this, at least cut it back. At least make it a little bit possible to not kill someone in my neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the Planning Commission?
start, did you all receive the pictures? You have them? Okay, because in one of the pictures, I didn't want to include this in my speaking, the gentleman spoke about people turning off Clake Street, turning left onto Nixon. I hope that you would find, I went in the morning in January and took pictures, and right before my eyes, a red truck was too impatient to wait for a car in front of him or her, and went into the oncoming lane on the Clake Street, it's a red truck, and then proceeded to turn left onto the oncoming lane on Nixon. So it just happened that day. That what I get concerned about this area is exactly what happened in that picture. So, all right. And then did you have the other picture with Blewett Street? That looks like it's because I have a large picture, that's all. So it's filled, okay. My name is Teresa Vizentiner, and I live at the corner of Renfrew and Blewett, so every day I see this out my window. I've been there 29 years, and I was on North Campus for 4 years, so I've been in Northeast Ann Arbor 34 years. And it's just been this past couple of years where there's been this added congestion, and I'm very concerned for the middle school kids, the impact on safety. And all due respect to Ms. Lowenstein, I don't know her, but the school was informed by us in December, so they were not being not truthful when she stated that, I can't remember her exact words, that they were not being, truthful. They found out through us. They may have received a small card in the mail, I'm not sure, but I get other people's mail frequently, so that could have happened with the schools too. I attended the Planning Commission meeting last year on October 4th when the special exception use was approved. I didn't know as much as I know now, and so that's why I'm speaking tonight. And my neighbor and I, James Moon, we attended the city council meeting in December and opposed the site plan because we thought that the error was made, there was an error made in the decision for the Planning Commission, but it wasn't with intention. It was because you lacked information and sufficient information. And all of this that we're presenting today is what we would like you to address. In terms of the developer may get up and say that 90% of the kids come from 2 miles and their staggered drop-off time, but the peak time would probably be nearly coinciding with Clegg, which is 8 o'clock. And it's just because it happens 10 minutes doesn't mean that the risk for injury and serious injury is reduced, just because I think sometimes it's worse when it's condensed within a short time. So I'd like to thank you for your time, and I just want to briefly say alternative use for this area to me would be organic garden for the middle school kids at Clegg, or a greenhouse, I don't know, so they could walk to it and make proper use of the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address? Yes.
Hello, my name is Laura Hannaford, and I live at 3306 Alton Court in Ann Arbor, and I was absolutely not planning on speaking. And the only reason I am up here today, right now, is I would just like to clarify some information that was proposed by a previous speaker about the times that the Clegg campus is busy. I'm the main office secretary, and I sit in the fishbowl, and I watch every morning people coming in, and every afternoon, and in the evenings when there's activities. And there, besides just our school beginning, there is pickup for high school students. So students are dropped off at 7, and the parents tend to wait, especially in the winters, to make sure that the buses come and that their students are there. So there are cars and students from 7 a.m., and then a lot of students don't come to school on time, and so there are continually cars coming in and out till at least 8:30, 8:45. So that's the morning, and then the evening, afternoon, parents start lining up we get out at 3:07. They start lining up at 2:20 to 2:30, and they sit in the parking lot or they sit on Blewett Road, and they will be there for 45 minutes, half hour to 45 minutes, waiting so that they can get a spot to get their student. And that will continue until about 3:15, 3:30. Then there's clubs and things that go on. The students are dismissed at 4:30, 5 o'clock for that, and there's always athletic games going on, and those are parking lots, which is close to the church. So there's kids, again, going in and out at a lot of times other than just the dismissal and the beginning time. So I just wanted to make sure that you had a more clear picture as to the times that that parking lot and the area on campus is busy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julie Kroll. I'm the traffic engineer for the project. Work for Fleece and Vandenbrink, 27725 Stansbury Boulevard, Farmington Hills. And I just wanted to provide you with some additional information, if I may. So as she's passing them out, as a traffic engineer, safety is first and foremost for me. I mean, I don't want to recommend or analyze or propose anything that's not safe for children. So, but the first thing, there's two graphics in front of you. The first I'm going to talk about is this one that it's got traffic volumes on it. So what we did is we actually got data from Rainbow at 3 of their facilities for an entire week. So we have a week's worth of data, check in and check out at 3 facilities, and we averaged the data, and then we compared that data with the traffic volumes that we actually received from the city on Clegg. And that's what the graph is showing here. So the blue is the volumes generated by the daycare facility, and the gray is the traffic volumes on Clegg Street. So in the figure here, you can see the peaks, the peak 15 minutes in the morning, and where the blue is, you can see it's kind of pretty consistent all day. So we're looking at what you see, that peak at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's 10 cars. So 5 in, 5 out at the daycare during the peak, where they have 140. So the 5 cars compared to the 140 is actually almost a margin of error when you look at it for the school. So the daycare, they don't come in these big swaths. They come consistently throughout the peak periods. So throughout the day. And then when compared to the afternoon traffic at the middle schools, you can see that it peaks twice, as she just mentioned, with the peak for the let out and then also afternoon activities. So if actually we added them together, if they didn't have afternoon activities, it'd probably equal the same as the morning. The second one is this shows all of the pedestrian routes, the bus routes, the bike lanes, and what I just wanted to point out is that the conflicting traffic volumes here at the site driveway, there is no sidewalk that goes in front of the site driveway, so we're not looking at any impact to pedestrians in front of this site driveway. So there will be no vehicles turning to conflict other than what's already existing out there now. And I'll be here if you have any other questions.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Hannaford. I live at 3306 Alton Court, and we've been residents in that neighborhood for 25 years. I'm not a traffic engineer, but I'm an eyewitness. This is my neighborhood. I need to go to work every day. I've had 3 kids, all go through Clegg. My wife works there. When you talk about traffic, the Nixon corridor right now is going to be considerably different in a couple of years when those developments fill out. So if we're talking about traffic moving through at this point in time, it's no indication of what it's going to be. The decision that could have been made about a daycare center with respect to this location could have been made without 12 developments happening and a city, as somebody said, being dropped on Northeast Ann Arbor. You guys created the traffic problem on the Nixon corridor. It's only going to get worse. You're going to spend millions of dollars on what you consider to be a silver bullet, which is traffic circles. But frankly, just the other day, I tried to get into the traffic circle at Duvarin at rush hour, and it was like being at a stoplight. They just kept coming up north from Nixon. That traffic corridor, you are at a tipping point right now. So the decision that you could have made about the daycare center has been entirely changed by what has happened in Northeast Ann Arbor and the development. And you're putting the buildings in there before you have the infrastructure. And everybody knows that. And now you're trying to actually pile on by putting more cars there. So if you're thinking that the traffic right now is what you expect to see in a couple of years, then you're going to find out that you're very wrong. But I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, my hat's on. My name is Jeremy Spiegel. My mother lives at 2432 Nixon Road, where I grew up. I just moved back into town. I live on the west side now, sorry, folks. I love the north side. I just want to encourage you to dismiss the chart that was given by the traffic representative. She does not say what demographics those child care centers undertook. She does not say whether maybe they were urban child care centers where most people walked to school instead of being dropped off. This is a for-profit company that would easily choose somebody that would cherry pick their numbers in order to meet their needs. One of my neighbors mentioned that it would fit in with the other schools in the neighborhood. This is a for-profit business, unlike the elementary schools and Clegg Middle School. First thing that happens is when they need to start making some more money, let's cut on safety. We don't need to have two people out there making sure the traffic's going okay. Let's just have one person. This is a huge decision that you have to make. And I would encourage you to think about who their interest is. Google their child care center, Rainbow Child Care, and you will find several news stories of abuse happening at these places. You know, they're not perfect. They're not a public school. They're not a place just bringing goodness into our neighborhood. They're a place trying to make money on the inconvenience of people around them. I thought it was absolutely hilarious when, I'm sorry, what's your name, ma'am? Miss Lowenstein compared childcare to AA meetings. Anybody ever catch that? Like, is that really what they see these students as? They're just numbers, they're just money, they're just profit for them. And I really, having grown up on that corner and probably being the only Jewish kid in the neighborhood to attend several meetings at that church was tiny. There was not 130 kids ever there plus 50 staff that they'll need to have there. This was a church that there's a reason why it's not there anymore, you know? It was like 30 people at a time, maybe. You can't let them come up with these crazy facts that this is the exact same thing. A giant building with 150 people in it is the same as a small church with 30 people in it and an AA meeting in the evenings. I don't know if any of y'all have ever been to AA meetings, but they're usually in the evenings and they're not during school hours, and they're usually pretty good drivers because they're sober. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Reed Fenton. I am the petitioner for the project, and I'm sure I'll be called up for some questions, so I'll keep it short. Just to start, obviously, we were in front of you a year ago or a little more than that, and since that time and even before then, we've been more than accommodating, doing anything that you have requested. We have sent out multiple notices to all of the neighbors, the school board. We have met with the neighbors. We have tried to contact the school board to work it out with them, and obviously have not been able to. And so I guess on top of that, I'd just like to point out that obviously, like everyone's acknowledged, there is a demand here, and the parents that need childcare are also citizens of Ann Arbor. So you can't have the overall traffic issue that encompasses North Ann Arbor here really be taken out on us and those parents. And so with that, there are a few things I wanted to just mention as well. There was talk about 130 students. As I said at the last meeting, that is in the event something is completely full, which is not possible just due to the function of the business with part-time students, full-time students, et cetera. And like one of the other people mentioned as well, over 80% of the parents come from within 2 miles, and typically put the locations on major commuter routes so that we're not generating new traffic. It's traffic that's there. that's simply turning off to come to the location. So, you know, as much as I do appreciate everyone's concerns with safety, I think you have to look at the data and the science behind it, and you know, and a logical approach to this, which is just like I mentioned, this isn't new traffic. This is traffic that's already there. We've done everything you've asked, and you know, all we're asking for is fair consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing, and I will read both of the motions. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the Rainbow Childcare site plan, condition on access being provided to the site over Clegg Street consistent with the survey included in the site plan and any necessary access for emergency vehicle use of the gated approach. That's motion number one. Motion number two, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission, after hearing all interested persons and reviewing all relevant information, finds the petition to substantially meet the standards in Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5.29.5, special exemptions, and therefore approves the Rainbow Childcare Center special exemption use for childcare center based on the following findings. 1, the proposed use is consistent with the R1C single-family zoning district as a special exemption use. 2, the proposed use has adequate access to Nixon Road. The special exemption use approval is based on the following conditions. 1, access being provided to the site over Clegg Street consistent with the survey included in the site plan. 2, the center will support a maximum of 130 children. Do I have a commissioner that will move? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Weatherby. We will begin discussion. Commissioner Gibrandal.
Just wondering if staff could explain for all of us how you integrate information from traffic studies into your reports and how you cover it. I know one of the community members talked about, you know, that we don't really cover it much in the report, and I'm wondering if you can just kind of go through your process of how you integrate that into your thinking.
You're correct. I mean, we don't provide an in-depth traffic analysis.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so all that filters into our study and our analysis of the project in itself. We don't do a detailed traffic analysis to provide to you all. But what they do provide, what they provide as their petitioner group, which their engineer, traffic engineer, would provide a detailed traffic impact study. That goes directly to our traffic engineer. She looks at it, they have their back and forth, which they did with this project, you know, to get the numbers right, where our traffic engineer felt very comfortable. We actually have also had an additional meeting with their staff as well as our traffic engineer to help clarify some things and review all the options possible. Once they she gets back all the information that our traffic engineer is requesting. She formulates her recommendation and her review comments, just like any other, just like we have our natural features, people look through that. Then we filter that in as part of our overall analysis and going through the standards that many people have mentioned and you see in our report. So while we don't directly, and we provide just basically as that summary without the entire traffic report, which is available through our eTrack-It system. But basically what we try and do is provide the summary of the net findings of what she has concluded or whichever traffic engineer has reviewed it and summarize that up in response to the special exception standards that we have to go by with between access and safety and all of those issues. So it's one factor that goes into the determination.
Thanks for that. And then if the traffic engineer for the project could come
Commissioner
up.
Gibrandal, if I could just append to that too before. This question has come up on other projects as well. As part of that analysis, the site under consideration is evaluated for its potential trip generation. It is considered in the context of existing traffic volumes that surround the network in that vicinity. That analysis also projects future traffic volumes. So in this case, those traffic volumes are based on data that are projecting end of development completion of some of those residential developments that are occurring. But any more details you're going to have to ask.
Okay, and that was kind of part of my question is whether I mean, there's a lot of big big projects coming down the pike north of here, and just wondering how that got integrated and whether the data that you were using in terms of trip generation now, or is that pretty recent data, or, you know, what, just if you could give us a little bit more background on, I know one of the things we struggled with in the past with some other projects is thinking about the big picture, and so I know staff has been trying to address that more lately, and so I just don't know if those conversations happened between you and our traffic engineer.
They did. So when we initially scope a project, now this study was done back, let's see, June? It's like a year ago that we first did this. And before we even started the study, it was like February of 2017, that we reached out to the traffic engineer here at the city to make sure we had the right scope, that we verified their trip generation to use in the study, that what background traffic that they wanted us to use. So everything that we do as a background, as a basis for our study, gets vetted through the city before we even go through the analysis portion of it, because we want to have it mostly reviewed before we even submit the study, because it's a lot easier for the city if they've checked through all of our pieces before we give them the whole. So it's a back and forth, as Matt mentioned, all the way through the process to make sure the city is very comfortable with what we're doing. So there's no surprises.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Commissioner Mills.
I have other comments and questions, but I want to follow. Ooh. I don't know what that's.
Try turning it.
Okay.
You have traffic questions?
Yes.
Okay, all right, then I won't sit down.
I have other questions too, but I want to follow up specifically on this one and get a little bit more details. So, because I don't know, can't read it all in great detail, can you tell us what, like Mr. Leonard said, the traffic study includes counts of what's happening today and then what happens in the future. So particular during the rush, can you tell us what they say goes through that Clegg, it's not Clegg Traver, it's Nixon intersection now, and then what you're projecting, just because to make sure that it's capturing all of the development that we know is happening north of there.
So, and like I said, the data that we have analyzed was 2016 data because, like I said, it was like a year ago. But so, existing data analysis for Clegg and Traver, as far as the operations were actually pretty good. In the morning, we were looking at eastbound approach at level service C, which is pretty good, and then Bs during the midday and PM. So there was no red flags for existing. When we get to future at Traver, it was still operating pretty well. I mean, as far as level of service operations. We also look at queuing analysis, which is the sim traffic and the simulations that we look at in our modeling and identify any queuing issues, and we did not identify any major queues there as well.
So I know our standards are based on level of service, but presumably there's some like counts that go in there, just because we know that there are hundreds of units north. So do you know what the counts are in terms of, can you tell us what the vehicle counts are at those peak times? And if you need a second to gather that, I can ask some other questions that are not traffic related.
So which intersection was it, Traver and Nixon?
I was really interested in Clegg.
Oh, sorry. At Clegg?
Yep.
On which approach were you looking as far as volume?
Well,
northbound, southbound. So it's actually, the volumes on Nixon, you probably know this, are very directional.
Right. So let's do southbound in the morning.
So southbound in the morning, the projected volume is like 480.
And what is it currently?
It is currently we had 480, and actually I talked to Cynthia, who's a traffic engineer, about this, because she had asked me a couple months ago if we included the background traffic for the proposed development to the north.
Mm-hmm.
And when we did the study, that hadn't come in yet.
Got it.
So their traffic study, I don't know what they included in their traffic study.
Okay. So this is, I think that this is one of the key questions that I have, particularly about turning movements coming in and out. I think that we certainly need to, do you know if Cynthia has, presumably we have new information now. Has she weighed in on this, like including that new additional information? I guess to either of you, either to staff or to the traffic engineer.
Which new information are you?
The fact that when the original traffic study was done, it didn't yet have counts for
They've been negotiating back and forth, and I've seen her request additional.
There was, she had asked me about that, and it was because when she had originally scoped it, she did not have the traffic study for that new development to the north, because this was over a year ago. So whatever that other traffic study, that would have included our traffic study. However, the trips generated by the daycare facility are relatively low. So the impact of this on the adjacent intersections, you wouldn't even notice it in comparison to that other development.
I totally buy that this is a drop in the bucket of an already overflowing bucket. I totally get that, but I think that if our background data, like we need to know what the background data is. There's been a lot of movement in that particular section of town, and if it doesn't include all of the development that we know has already been approved and is in the process of construction, that concerns me. That gives me pause. And so I would want to make sure that that's part of this, and would wonder why Cynthia wouldn't require that as part of, for this revision. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, that has to do with traffic that I'm curious about is I understand, what we're seeing before us is really the closing of the parking lot access, the eastern parking lot access to Clague, with the idea that now cars aren't going out that way. But has it been redone to assume now that all of the cars are going to when they're leaving the daycare center, are going to make a left onto Clague?
Yes. That would be a worst case scenario.
Okay.
And the operations of that were acceptable because we're talking about this, it's not this peak like you see with the schools in 15 minutes. It's spread out over 2 hours in the morning as people go to work. And like Reed said, the other thing we did not include was pass-by trips. So we're assuming that the trips generated by this development are, which doesn't make any sense, but they would be from home to daycare to home, because they're single car generated trips, not pass-by trips. Whereas if I'm on my way to work and I'd stop in at my daycare, drop off my kid, and keep going on my way to work, that's a pass-by trip, and that's a trip that's already on the adjacent street. So it wouldn't be an additional trip to the roadway, whereas a trips generated would be, and that's what we evaluated here.
Yeah, so what concerns me about that, I'm with you. So as backup, this is one of the opening comments, but since I was feeding off of what Commissioner Gibrandel said, I have 2 kids in daycare. One is finally going to kindergarten in 2 weeks. But I am well familiar with operations and know that I just looked, our child care facility is licensed for 95. I have never seen more than 10 cars there at one time, because people are spread out. So I totally get that some parents drop off at 7, some parents drop off at 7:30, like some parents drop off at 10 o'clock. So I get that part of it. But based on what you just said, if people are coming in to the city, if you're helping to serve the populations that are, those subdivisions that are being built to the north, they're going to be making a left across Nixon to come in onto Clague, to come into the center. Then they're going to make a left out of the center onto Clague and have to make a left into that already flowing traffic. So it's actually a harder turn. Does that make sense?
It does. One of the things that the city had made us aware of initially from this onset is that boulevard that they're proposing will make that intersection a right-in, right-out only. So they asked us, at the time we actually did the study, the roundabouts weren't even in, where you now have the 2 roundabouts. So with the proposed layout for Nixon, that intersection with Clegg is a right in, right out only. So it's going to eliminate the left turns, eliminate the conflicts that are currently there, and improve safety as a result of it.
Okay.
So like I'm like, this short term may be a little painful, but the long term picture of this is going to be a much better, safer operation.
Got it. I would personally feel more comfortable if we had the traffic engineer, if we had somebody from the traffic engineer staff here. Not that it's often good for us to hear it from Cynthia herself or representative.
Well, when I talked to Cynthia this afternoon, she said she wasn't coming.
Okay.
If I could just
Yeah.
interrupt, my apologies, but I just want to be clear, as part of the condition for city staff reviewing and recommending approval of the traffic study was requiring the traffic study to be updated with the same data set that was utilized for the Nixon Road corridor study. So I just want to be clear that even though this study that the petitioner has provided was initiated some time ago prior to the recommendation for approval by our staff, they were required to update the data that they were using to coincide with the same data the city was using for the Nixon corridor study. Now, I'm obviously not well-versed in what those differences are, but I just want to clarify that the same data set has been used in both reports.
That's helpful.
That is true.
That you said, though, that the data was from before and that something wasn't available, now I have a question about it. So I'd really like to get that resolved. I'm trying to see if I have anything else specifically on traffic. So that was my question about adequate access to Nixon. It's really what happens with all of those cars now, assuming to going in and out of Clegg and making those turns onto Nixon. I'm not sure about that. Something that I wanted to bring up is that one of our, based on some comments, one of the criteria, this is not traffic, so
okay,
you can
so
go
I'm
ahead
good.
and sit down.
Thanks.
Is whether or not the proposed development is consistent with the general vicinity. And there are school uses in the general vicinity, and so I think that it is consistent. Now, we say with the current use, or current and planned use in the general vicinity, it's on the specific property, yes, this is a change. But I think in terms of its compatibility, it is another school use. Personally, I would love to see it next to an elementary school because I think that there's going to be more parents who would drive once, drop off the little kids and drop off the elementary school students. But maybe there are some that have drop off at daycare and middle school. My kids are closer together than that. But I do think it's consistent with what's happening in the general vicinity, and I generally am in favor of having childcare facilities in our neighborhoods. I think that, and the fact that we expanded bicycle parking and trailer parking, I think that nobody wants to have to make an extra trip to the other side. If you don't have kids that are in daycare right now, you don't know perhaps that there are long waiting lists for any of the centers in town. So there is certainly an existing need. And so generally speaking, I see this as consistent, but I am concerned about some of those traffic issues that in particular, I have questions about.
Commissioner Briggs.
So Commissioner Mills' statements pretty much echoed how I processed this petition last time around. And however, I think there's new information right now that's leading me to a different conclusion than last time. One is what we're asked to reconsider, which is the change in the access. I think it's pretty concerning that we have only one access drive here now, that every car that's coming out of this driveway is going to be turning left onto Clegg when we know at peak hours how many cars are going to be turning into Clegg to drop off students. And that seems, despite the reports that the traffic engineers are providing us, particularly problematic in terms of actually just vehicular safety at that point is what I'm given the fact that there's not a pedestrian. There's not a sidewalk there, though potentially there are kids biking on the street there, so that there is some bicycle safety issues that are raised. However, so I'm questioning whether the proposed use has whether it's meeting the proposed use has adequate access to Nixon Road is one issue. The second one is on, I guess, under B, no, I guess it's under A. A4 will not be detrimental to the use, peaceful enjoyment, economic value, or development of the neighboring property. I think we heard, as opposed to last time, that there are so many school officials here tonight that are basically saying that this is going to have a detrimental use on school property. And that's something we were not hearing last time around. And what we're hearing is that any increase, however minuscule, in the amount of cars coming into that driveway is of concern to them. And so while I agree and accept that this kind of model that's been presented to us really is just a trickle coming in, it is 100%, we can be certain that it's going to increase the flow of vehicles into that section. And what we're hearing from the neighboring property and public schools, which is valid, is that they're seeing a problem in that area. And I'm glad to hear how many school officials are here tonight stating to us that there's a recognized problem there. As a point of comment, I worked on Safe Routes to School at Clegg a number of years ago, and I know it was a problem then, and there's been infrastructure improvements there, but I look forward to seeing changes along. It sounds like there's interest in improving pedestrian safety and bicycle safety along that Clegg corridor, along Blewett. And I look forward to seeing infrastructure improvements made hopefully by the school there to do bump outs, to do anything possible to increase the visibility of pedestrians, students trying to cross in that area, and any other sort of infrastructure improvements that can be made. So I think there is different information for me tonight than there was a year ago. So those are my comments.
Commissioner Weatherby.
So this is tricky for me. I went to Thurston, I went to Clegg many years ago. One thing that has changed a lot, and I think is not even so much the houses, but the number of people driving their kids to school. And that is concerning to me. That is probably the most dangerous thing people do with their kids every day, is drive them to school. And so, so I'm conflicted, because we are talking about something that didn't exist in as much in the past because of a change of behavior of the parents and the people around the schools. Also, several people have noted that Clegg is a school of choice and is increasing their enrollment. So some of the safety concerns, I think I agree with Commissioner Briggs that it's also important that the schools look at those safety concerns, and I know that you are, and that you are very, very committed to that. But, you know, now we're looking at, okay, this preschool can't have this use while the public school increases the use as a school of choice, which is somewhat of a profit. And so it, you know, we're starting to kind of have to weigh those two against each other. And that's tough for me. I mean, I think it's one thing to say, oh, this big bad corporation is doing this thing, but this big bad corporation is a preschool. And sort of the vitriol and the angst on all sides is disturbing to me. I mean, these are our children, whether they're preschool or junior high. And, you know, I think we all are concerned about safety in many ways. So that is one thing that I'm, you know, we're talking about the existing conditions where parents are kind of running kids over or trying to, I mean, that's disturbing to me. I mean, you have expose something that for me is very disturbing, that this is, it's not someone else, it's us. So I think there are a lot of issues here that are not just Rainbow Preschool is not the problem. So while I agree with Commissioner Mills that maybe the traffic studies that we need to see some, they seem like not, I don't quite know what we are voting on and what we aren't voting on. I am not inclined to say no to Rainbow Preschool on these counts, because if Clegg is increasing their enrollment and it just, some of the safety concerns, which I agree with, and I am very, I think we need to address those. We need to address those in an entire way. And this is a sort of school campus area, which I think is a compatible use. And maybe together we can work to really reduce the number of vehicle trips, to reduce the speeding, to reduce the dangerous situations for kids in that area, whether they're 5 years old or 12 years old. You know, the high school drop-offs, I mean, the schools are really using Clegg as a big drop-off area, and you know, it's hard for me to say that the safety is a problem when Clegg is doing high school drop-off and Clegg is increasing enrollment, and I find those things a little incompatible. So I would like to see more information on the traffic and just make sure that we have the real data and the projected data. But as far as the uses, I'm very comfortable with the uses.
Commissioner Sauvé.
I really appreciate Commissioner Weatherby's comments there. This is my first time looking at this project in depth, being new to the commission, and so I don't have as much context to the historical backing, especially about the entryways. And to comment again on the traffic and the proximity of the left turn out and then the left turn onto Nixon is concerning, especially if cars are already kind of pointing out into Nixon to ease their blind spot for those turns. But what it reads to me is not a collaboration between the two. The school has voiced, and a lot of the neighborhood has voiced concern about safety. But my view of the eastern access and allowing that easement would actually provide a safer route. And so the collaboration between the school and Rainbow Daycare would actually provide a safer entry and exit out of this parking lot further away from the intersection at Nixon and Clegg to provide better eyesight lines, more control over that traffic. So with the other previous comments, I do see that this is a drop in a larger traffic bucket, but for the voice of safety, and I'm not a traffic engineer, but and not many of you are either. There are some that I respect your professional opinions. My intuition reads that an intersection further away from the main intersection will help with eyesight, sight lines for turning, to better protect the students and the kids at both properties. And so I would actually encourage that the school and Rainbow continue discussions for the other easement to actually be opened up again to create better flow if safety is the concern. And I would actually be interested in the previous traffic reports with the eastern entrance open, and if there were kind of better results for safety on Clegg because of that.
Commissioner Woods.
I want to echo what our commissioner just said, because I too was looking and wondering if there wasn't some solution that would come about if the school system and Rainbow were able to work out that easement. And I know we still have some folks here from the public schools. I wasn't at the meeting in October when this was discussed, but I was wondering whether or not a representative would mind coming forward. I just had some curiosity about this, please.
Sure.
So thanks for being here, and thanks for
Absolutely.
coming up to speak also. So the notes that we have in terms of the update just indicates that the the meeting at Ann Arbor City Council in last February, that the public schools objected to the use of Clay Drive easement for access to the site. So was that based upon the fact that there were the security concerns, and had those concerns been voiced at the previous City Planning Commission?
We had a couple concerns, if I remember correctly, just based on my own notes when we were reviewing it at the Board of Education level. One of them was there were some incorrect assumptions about the easement itself. So that was part of what Senate, I think, made a good case to have it reviewed again. And then the traffic study seemed to be missing some data as well, and it sounds like that's still the case. So those were some of our basic concerns. Beyond safety, I think, to your point, the parent behavior is something that we can't mandate necessarily, although we look for ways to encourage people to do that. Our school of choice numbers are, across our district, it's 5 to 7% of our 18,000 students are school of choice students. So I know we talk about that a lot as a kind of a political talking point. It's an important one, but those are the data that we have right now.
Okay.
Are there any other questions that I could answer while I'm...
I don't think so, not at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So I too would want to see that data before making my decision, but I am leaning towards not approving this, and mainly it's because, one, I think it's pretty rare for so many school system folks to come to our meeting. We're not high on the list, but nevertheless, I have to really pay attention to what's being said, and I have 5 children and 9 grandchildren, and so I really kind of get attuned to what's going on out there when it comes to issues around children. And looking at those photos, and thank you whoever it was that provided that, a picture says 1,000 words sometimes, and I can't look at that and then say, oh no, it's got to be better than that. And so at this point, I'm not in favor of the petition, although I certainly too don't want to penalize Rainbow childcare, and yet I think that it's just unfortunate this particular location and the way that folks would have to enter and exit that site would just increase the traffic concerns that I think all of us here tonight see at this location. So that's my comment.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I thank my colleagues for asking many of the questions. It seems as though the same themes and topics come up as we review each of these site plans, and the course of conversation tends to follow a similar pattern when it comes to traffic concerns for safety, particularly around our schools. I just wanted to shore up a couple facts about this chart, if I could. When the 3 locations that you aggregated data for to give your kind of analysis of trends, can you describe those facilities, where they're located, and are they under Rainbow Care's ownership?
The locations were in Washtenaw County, and they were in similar locations to what is proposed here. So that's the data that I requested. They gave me 5 days of data for each of the facilities, check in, check out. I just summarized it here.
And same operator?
Are they? Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the question of where the 80% of parents live within 2 miles, could you speak to that statistic as well?
Yeah, so that came about when we analyzed actually every center across the country.
Okay.
And so the purpose of that was for a site selection tool, analyzing what is the proper demographic for this use, and where do they come from, how far they're willing to drive, et cetera. And so that came from, we were aggregating data across the company, and it showed that it was over 80% of all customers come from within 2 miles across
So that's part of your market studies?
Correct.
To look at that. So your investment is hinging on the fact that people won't be driving very far or biking very far or walking very far?
Correct, and if you, I mean, similar to all the complaints on traffic here, obviously this is a consistent theme across the country with the way things are going, and so we want to be as conveniently located as possible to the families that we're trying to capture.
Okay, thank you. So I think with those two statistics, it says a few things. One is that the people who would possibly be going to this proposed facility are our neighbors. They're people who already live in the area, are already driving in the area. And I think it's important that when we talk about new development, we have to understand that this location isn't going to create 90 parents out of nowhere. These 90 parents already exist. They exist within 2 miles, or 70 of them exist within 2 miles of the location, and they're going to be driving to child care centers regardless of whether or not this exists. And that means they're going to be clogging up the roads just as much. What does change is their destination, and that's where I start to get into concerns, especially as we add more cars and volume to the area. It's not the number of cars that necessarily creates a safety concern. It's their speed and their turning movements more than anything. And as you add more cars to an environment, you increase the odds that a dangerous turning motion might happen or that dangerous speeds could occur. Although sometimes more cars mean lower speeds. So I think I'm with my fellow commissioners in that I need to better understand the dynamics of increased background traffic from the developments to the north. With particularity how they affect the turning movements, both from the parking lot to Nixon, as well as what the implications were for removing one of the access points. I would hate to think that creating a stone wall to be defiant against change would create a less safe environment. And so I'd like to better understand those dynamics. But I think it's very clear that there's already a significant safety issue at Clegg, and that the city and the schools need to work together to start to resolve and mitigate some of those issues. And you know, I need to be certain in my vote that the addition of these turning movements and these 5 to 15 cars every half hour wouldn't significantly increase that danger. So it sounded as though Commissioner Mills was hinting towards a postponement for access to more information. I'm not going to make that motion right now, just in case other commissioners have more questions, but I was predicting it.
So just to add a couple comments, so I'm an alumni of Logan and Clegg. I walked to school, to both of those schools, uphill both ways. My mother, who's probably watching right now, please note that they don't do that anymore to their kids. So a couple things in regards to the traffic study. So here are the facts that we have. There's 272 units that have been added to the Woodbury Club apartments that are north of the site. There are nearly 480 condos coming online in North Oaks, which we've approved. There's the North Sky development, which has started construction, 104 units, plus in Ann Arbor Township, Northbrook community of 40 homes, and Cornwall Farms off of Pontiac Trail near Duvarin, 20 more homes. Plus, we know of several other developments coming. But this is what's already been approved. What's been approved is a significant number of units, and I would want to know that the traffic study has taken into account those units that we've already approved. And at this point, I don't have the confidence that that's been that's happened. So that's my concern, and that is why I would favor a postponement on this issue until the traffic engineer can verify this and can work with us to make sure that what what she has looked at is the accurate data of what's been approved. Second item that I want to discuss is that it is a true statement. There are waiting lists at every single daycare center all across Ann Arbor. It is a real problem, and from my professional experience, families are choosing not to move to Ann Arbor because they can't find adequate childcare. That is also a problem for the Ann Arbor School District, because ultimately if those families don't move here, those students don't enter our schools, and that's a problem. So I do think that the petitioner and the school district need to work together to somehow come up with a solution to this. So with those two items, I would favor a postponement, but I believe Commissioner Sauvé had a comment.
Along with the additional request of the traffic report, and thank you so much for all the other numbers, a request from the school might be with the school of choice. Just some initial data says that the average between Thurston, Logan, and Clegg is about 10%, not the 5% per the school per the website. So if there's a growth, or if you can provide those data numbers, and if they can be included in the traffic report, so that we can consider the impact of the school as well. I think we are looking at this site because it has to go through planning, but the school doesn't for just increasing students, and so that data wouldn't be supplied otherwise. And so if we can get that information, yep.
I very much appreciate that question. We have regular updates from our architects who study growth and development in the area. The most recent of those reports detailed the number of students from the homes that you just articulated, over 800 units coming into this area. As that growth occurs, the school of choice valve, which currently is around 5% of students in the district, that closes. So a companion example would be A2 STEAM at Northside, where currently the number of school of choice students you could count on one hand because the neighborhood has filled the school. So we use school of choice as a valve when there are seats available. We anticipate within 1 to 4 years, depending on how quickly this area builds out, that there will not be seats available for school of choice. So that's pretty much how our process works.
Okay, and is that the same for the commuting to Huron High School and the bus commute? Can you provide any of those additional support numbers as well?
Of how many students catch the bus there?
Yeah.
I will need to check on that.
Okay.
That's not a large number.
Okay.
It does happen early in the morning, but not a large number.
Yeah, I would just encourage more information sharing for things that we can't kind of request in data
We'll
would be
happy,
helpful.
Happy to get that for
Thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Weatherby.
And I think just a number to add to that, and again, I'm just looking at the capacity of Clegg. It says 756. This is just a online article, so I don't know if that's a true number or not. But as more people come in, there will be more students at that school, presumably.
Yes.
Which is why schools of choice is happening until that happens.
Right.
So I guess maybe also like the capacity or the predicted capacity of Clegg.
So Clegg is already on the list of schools for consideration for enhancement to meet the demands of this anticipated growth. So we would be keeping an eye on that enrollment growth. We never know when homes are built for sure, if they're going to be filled with little kids or big kids or no kids. So we are monitoring that, but Clegg is on that list of schools for enhancement if that growth pace determines.
So that would be like an addition to Clegg?
It would be an
yeah.
addition.
Okay.
So we're very pleased that that's a nice piece of property that would offer us the opportunity to enhance. As we've done at Northside, A2 STEAM at Northside, same thing is that as the demand was there, we enhanced the school and increased the enrollment, closing that valve to schools of choice. That's our natural rhythm in the district. So I hope that's helpful, and we'll follow up with the precise numbers that you asked. Thank you.
Commissioner Mills.
It's you.
Usually I say I have a magnetic personality, but only on that particular microphone. So I would like to make a motion to postpone this petition until we can have the traffic engineer available. Yes.
And do we have a second for that? Seconded by Commissioner Weatherby. Discussion, Mr. Leonard?
I just want to clarify the specific information. So I've made a couple of notes. I'll follow up with the school district to get as much of that data as might be available. I've specifically heard that you want more clarification regarding if the traffic study has considered background traffic projecting the completion of the units that Chair Milstein has indicated. Commissioner Ackerman specifically asked if that analysis has any impact on proposed turning movements. Is there other specific data that I can alert the traffic engineer to provide as well?
Two other things that I heard, or maybe it's a modification from the first one, is both understanding what the intersection is projected to be with this development and all of the 1,000 units north of there, and then with both with and without the Rainbow facility. The other thing that I heard was a comparison of the traffic movements, particularly in the proposal that's before us now and the proposal that we saw before, if that's possible.
Yeah, I will definitely do that. My recollection is that because our traffic analysis is based on the street network, it's not on private drives. You're not going to see much different, but I'll make sure that that's clarified as well.
I think in particular what I'm interested in is the traffic movements at the intersection. So it would be Blewett and Nixon versus Clegg and Nixon under current proposal versus previous proposal. Does that capture that effectively? Those were the key things.
And then Commissioner Briggs, followed by Commissioner Withery.
One thing that I heard the petitioner's traffic engineer state was that these the problems that we might see initially would be relieved a little bit in a few years, potentially if there was a boulevard. And I'm just curious. My understanding is that there's no real planning for that happening yet, but I'd be just for clarification, if there's a timeline that's expected or more roundabouts, any changes in the roadway environment would be useful to know.
Commissioner Weatherby. Commissioner Ackerman?
Yeah, I would encourage folks to review Legistar, which is the online portal to all things legislation at the local level, for last Wednesday's Transportation Commission meeting, in which we received an update on that project. But I would also add a level of caution that they're in very preliminary planning, and it has by no means received approvals, and we're making decisions for 2018.
Thank you. Seeing no other comment, Commissioner Briggs.
Is this no other comment on this agenda item?
This is for postponement.
Postponement, okay.
Which, if we postpone, we are done.
Okay, so I do have a comment.
Go right ahead.
So, just in case, one bigger issue, I'm glad to see so many folks who came out tonight, and obviously that was sort of weighted in one direction. Reading through the public commentary, however, gave me pause in terms of what the public perception is of how city government and city staff operate. And while I really appreciate many of the issues that were raised tonight, and actually it really helped to form a different opinion for me tonight than I had previously, I guess I would like to say from this perspective, there were issues noted in public comments about how this meeting might have been scheduled tonight intentionally to reduce the amount of folks who come to this meeting. And it is not my understanding or experience that city staff or city government would ever do something like that. I personally have done advocacy a lot in my life and have been very frustrated by the timing of certain meetings right before holidays and at inconvenient times for my own life. And these unfortunately just come up at different times. And so I guess I just like to throw out there that while there may be concerns with this project and the impacts on the neighborhood, that I hope that the takeaway from the citizenry is not that city government doesn't care or that city staff is working actively in a way that would be detrimental to public input, because that's not my experience. So I just wanted to throw out that comment in case folks are not able to make it to the next meeting.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no one, all those in favor of postponement, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? This agenda item is postponed. It is 9 o'clock, and I will, let's take a 5-minute recess. our agenda. The next item, we are now in regular business, is 1448 Warrington Drive annexation and zoning for city council approval. And I welcome Mr. Chang for a staff report.
Thank you. This is the aerial photo. The site is located on the east side of Newport, north of Warrington and Bird Hills Drive. It's approximately 2-acre site. As you can see on the photograph, there are 2 parcels, and there is a house that is set on both of those parcels. The site is in Ann Arbor Township. The proposal is for rezoning to R1A, single-family residential, which is also the surrounding zoning. Here's a picture from Warrington. You can see the house. As part of the approval or the contingencies of approval on this site, they would have to combine the lot so that the house does not sit on both of the property lines. Staff recommends approval of the annexation and the zoning.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 1448 Warrington Drive annexation and R1A single-family dwelling district zoning. Do I have a commissioner that will move? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Woods. Do we have any discussion? Seeing no, we'll move on to the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any against? It is approved. Thank you. Moving on to item 10B, 2019 West Stadium Boulevard Site Plan and Special Exemption Use for City Planning Commission approval. Mr. Chang.
Okay, thank you. We have both the aerial and the zoning map side by side. To the left is the aerial. That's the existing building. It's approximately 40,000 square foot building built in the 1960s. It is used for a variety of uses, including retail, storage, and it has access off from Stadium, going through there back towards, I'll just say it's a bar, restaurant. The zoning, it does have split zoning, C2B and C3, which is fine. Provisioning centers are allowed in both the zonings. It's a little difficult to see, but it kind of bisects the site. Here you can see the picture towards the front off from Stadium. This is where the provisioning center is proposed. At this time, they're proposing a 6,000 square foot provisioning center that may fluctuate. To the bottom picture, that is the exiting from the site from West Stadium. It's two-way traffic. It's a little difficult to see probably at home, but this is the existing building. Some of the issues that came up is this requires a site plan because it is a special exception use. It does require a traffic statement, which was provided by the petitioner, and fire hydrant coverage, which was provided by the petitioner. But since we have scheduled this, additional information is being requested by city staff. That is why we're requesting postponement at this time. The petitioner may be asking for approval subject to these items being addressed, but we do need additional information to get a little more feedback to move this one forward as far as staff is concerned for approval. Here you can see the provisioning center off of Stadium. The yellow is the 600-foot buffer from another provisioning center. Just for a reminder, that yellow would have to hit that blue star up to the northwest, so it's probably still 1,000 feet away from the other provisioning center. The underlying green, that's the zoning that allows for a provisioning center, which this site has, and of course the 1,000-foot buffer from public schools, which is in the red. So this does meet all the qualifications for a provisioning center. Staff is here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I will now open the public hearing on this item. If anyone in the audience wishes to address the Planning Commission, you may do so by standing up to the podium, stating your name and address for the record.
Good evening. I'm Benjamin Jolf, and I represent the petitioners on this project. I'd just like to start and thank Brett and Chris. They've done a wonderful job working on us throughout this project, and we've just been thankful. They've just been extremely helpful throughout the process. Now, as you all know, you've done many of these SEUs for these provisioning centers, so I'm not going to go through a full history of it, but I do want to just reiterate that in this case, when you have a business, a provisioning business moving into any place, unlike any other business that would move in there, we have to meet the SEU requirements. That is why you see the site plan showing a fire hydrant being installed, because as part of this process, that we found that a small portion of the building was not covered by those hydrants currently near the property. So the petitioner will be spending a six-figure sum in order to put a hydrant in. And that brings us to the next part, which was part of the SEU, was possibly doing a traffic study. Now, I will tell you that traffic study was brought on by the proposed size of the provisioning center, which was actually, I wasn't there when the proposed size was fixed, but they put 7,000 square feet on the petition. That 7,000 square feet actually made it so the daily trips to the provisioning center showed a rather large number. That large number triggered the traffic study by the engineering office under the city code. Now, my clients have told me they do not need such a large provisioning center space of 7,000 square feet, and we actually did a little bit of math, and I believe it's just under 2,200 square feet will no longer trigger that traffic study underneath the city engineering code. So to be honest with you, tonight we're just going to come up there. We'd like to hear your comments, and we plan on submitting a new site plan that's going to show it being under 2,200 square feet, which will then no longer trigger, from our engineer's mouth, will no longer trigger the traffic engineering study on the site. Obviously, as Mr. Chang just said, you guys could go ahead and approve it tonight on the condition that we submit a new site plan with a smaller number of square feet so that it doesn't trigger that plan. We'd absolutely, we'd be grateful if you did that. If you don't, we completely understand, and we will be submitting a new site plan with that smaller square footage on it tomorrow, and we hope to have it reviewed at the next meeting. So, you know, if you want to, again, if you'd like to approve it, it might save us all some time at the next meeting, and I won't have to come here, and you guys won't have to consider it. I'm available for any questions that you may have about this particular SEU, and thank you very much again for your time, and thanks again to Brett and Chris for being so helpful throughout the process.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this petition? Seeing no one, I will close this public hearing and move on to the lengthy motion that I will ask one of my colleagues to read, if anyone is willing to. Commissioner Mills.
I'm testing out my new microphone.
And it's working very well.
It is. So I would like to move that the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission, after hearing all interested persons and reviewing all relevant information, including an accompanying site plan, finds the petition substantially meets the standards in Chapter 55 Unified Development Code, Section 5:29.5D Special Exceptions, and Section 5:16.3G Medical Marijuana Facility, and therefore approves the 2019 West Stadium Special Exception Use for a Medical Marijuana Provisioning Center. And that the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission approves the attached site plan, which demonstrates compliance with the applicable special exception use standards as no physical development of the property is proposed. This approval is based on the following findings. 1, the proposed use will be consistent with the C3 Fringe Local Business District and C2B Business Service District, which provides for commercial activities including retail establishments, offices, and personal services. 2, the proposed use will not adversely impact traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists, circulation, or road intersections based on the location. West Stadium provides access to the site, and the proposed use is consistent with other surrounding uses' traffic impact. 3, through documentation submitted by the petitioner regarding waste disposal, inventory tracking, security, and other methods of operation of the facility, the provisioning center will be operated in a manner that will not have an adverse impact on the neighboring properties or area and will not have a detrimental impact on natural features. This special exception use approval is based on the following conditions. 1, the petitioner obtaining and maintaining both a state of Michigan medical marijuana license and a City of Ann Arbor medical marijuana permit, and providing documentation to planning services within 3 years of the City Planning Commission approval date of this petition. 2, the petitioner operating a medical marijuana business at this address within 3 years of the City Planning Commission approval date of this petition. 3, the petitioner will install 6 Class B and 5 Class C bicycle parking hoops as shown on sheet 4. The parking spaces must be installed before certificate of occupancy is issued. 4, the special exception use may occupy no more than 7,000 square feet of the entire building. 5, hydrants shall be located such that all buildings and structures on site will be included in a 250-foot radius drawn around each hydrant before issuance of a certificate of occupancy. 6, the petitioner will maintain the operating hours of 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Sunday. And that the Ann Arbor Planning Commission approves the attached site plan which demonstrates compliance with the applicable special exception use standards.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Briggs. Discussion. Commissioner Weatherby.
So I guess I'm a lot happier with it being 2,200 square feet than 7,000 square feet, so yay. I'm also not going to approve it without, but good try. I did have some questions. Is this, it's right near the Wolverine Brewing, like as you come in, are the parking spots going to be marked specific for the, I just know that traffic in that area is a little weird, and how this is going to be set up, maybe that's, I don't know who's the best person to answer that, but will they be marked, or how's it, these versus Wolverine, or?
Yes, the total number of parking spaces on site, I think, are around 64, and what's required is 73 based on the counts they have provided. They were going to formalize the parking spaces. Staff accepted those numbers because typically the bar operation is going to be more towards dinner hours and later in the evening, where the hours here were going to be between, what we just, 8 to 9 or 9 to 8, something like that. So we thought with the shared parking, it should be able to be a compatible uses.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Does any of the site layout and parking change given the reduction in square footage? Does that kick in a whole different?
It's based on the building. In fact, I would say because they're proposing to reduce it from 6,000 to 7,000 feet down to 2,200 square feet, there's probably less of a need for a retail type of parking spaces.
That's kind of what I was wondering, is will the site plan change because, I mean, it's like a third or.
It won't as far as the parking goes, but I've been at the site several times, and I've noticed no matter what time, the parking that's up towards the front of the site, as you can see, it's not much more than that. Even at the busiest hours for the brewery towards the back, they're making their parking towards the back, and they're still not parking out towards the front.
Yeah.
So even with the reduction, I think from the 7,000 to 2,200, I think parking is going to be less of an issue towards the front of this building.
Okay. Commissioner Woods.
For the petitioner, just a question about the fact that you're going down to 2,200 square feet, correct? So what's being used in the rest of that building, and how do we know that that's all that you're going to use? How's the building divided up?
Absolutely. The space will be partitioned off with fire-rated walls as called for by LARA and the state of Michigan in the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. The other piece of the building owner has not decided what he's going to be doing with that space yet. Obviously, it won't be part of the Medical Marijuana Provisioning Center.
Okay. And do you have a basement in that building? Is that correct? Because I was just reading through back here where it's talking about the descriptions and storing of the product and things like that. And there was a place where it mentioned storage in the basement or something. So I don't know if this is just standard boilerplate language, as they say, and your building is a little bit different. I'll have to see where I saw it now. But does this building have a basement?
No, there is no basement in the building, so that may be a little bit of boilerplate language that got left over by a different petition.
Okay. I should probably find where it is, and then we can come back to it. Is it, which one?
Top of page 2, line 4 of page 2.
Okay.
Under sales procedures and inventory tracking.
Yeah, right. So let me just ask staff, do we just have to go through and take out anything that's not applicable?
Yeah.
Or how's that?
Where is this located? That there's a reference to a basement?
Mm-hmm.
Page 2, in the operations statement.
Operations statement.
The provisioning center's standard operating procedures. It's actually all over.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. That is something the petitioner had used as an attachment. I'll have to go through that. I'll have them amend that, send it back in so we can upload that and track it.
Okay.
We'll get you a new operations statement tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah, I have a quick question. So I see what the current layout is of the building and what the current businesses are. Where is the 2,200 square feet planned to, which part of the building is the 2,200 square feet that's going to be used?
It's going to be the front of the building. The orange entrance that you see right now is going to be the part, we feel that that's the best area for this usage.
Okay.
The rest of the building will probably be used for warehousing, honestly.
Okay, thank you. Any, Commissioner Briggs?
So I was initially concerned when I read this about the number of spaces that needed to be provided. It doesn't sound like it's going to be causing any changes to the parking lot, but I guess I'm just generally wondering if this, it seems like our, how we're calculating the need for parking for this use seems to create, I mean, it seems like it would be a dream come true if you had like 64 or 73 customers showing up. And I don't know, I mean, who knows what the future holds, but it seems unlikely. I'm wondering if our calculations, considering are just, what's going on with our calculations, I guess is my question. Do they need to be revisited for this use?
Yeah, as we're doing the calculations, I'll have a better site plan. I think that's a little clearer that they showed where I put the aerial up on the screen. It's a little difficult to start counting all the parking spaces that are in the front, the side, and along the building there, along the brewery from the north and the south area. We can hand count them and make sure that, in fact, that is 73 spaces, I believe.
Well, Chris, what standard are you applying for a provisioning center for parking requirements?
So we use it under the commercial standards, which is as if it's a commercial building less than, I want to say 100,000 square feet, which is pretty standard. So you have a range of between approximately 3 to 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
And just as a frame of reference, we did not, when we created the medical marijuana, we didn't create specific parking standards, so that's why we rely on the general commercial. When we're talking about traffic, however, the International Traffic Engineer Manual does have specific data based on medical marijuana dispensaries or provisioning centers.
I guess my concern is less, I'm just raising this generally, it doesn't sound like it's going to come into an issue here. We're not going to be requiring more parking than we think is required, but I'm worried that at some point we're going to end up, especially in these sort of periphery areas, finding that, we're asking people to build more. I don't know, it just seems like something maybe as we're considering parking later that we should revisit, like our parking standards for medical marijuana dispensaries.
I'd also like to add, when I heard that warehousing is probably going to be used for that empty space, maybe it's 5,000 plus square feet, they probably are looking at it because it's such a lower rate of parking that's required for it. So I'll double check to make sure that if they're using warehousing, which is actually 1 space per 1,000 square feet, which may only need 5 parking spaces, if that's how indeed they're calculating it.
Okay. Thanks.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question about the fire hydrant. That just struck me. Where are the gaps in fire hydrant coverage at this time?
So I'm glad you asked that. The front of the building is actually covered by fire hydrant coverage.
Okay.
And if there's another commercial building or a business were to actually move in there, there would be no issue. It's been happening probably for the last 60 years at this site. But because it's a special exception use, it does require a site plan review, which kicks in the fire and safety review, so a hydrant would be required at the site. This is our opportunity to make it safe. Now, the hydrant is actually located in the corner of the building. It's difficult to see on here. I'll probably point to it. I don't know if you can see that on, in that area. The issue with it is that it does meet the fire hydrant coverage. You can start seeing kind of the arc that's going around the building for the fire hydrant coverage. But what we had discovered today with our fire marshal is that they need a little bit more room to actually access that hydrant. So they're gonna have to relocate the hydrant. So we think it can be done, but we need to demonstrate that it can be done. So they're gonna have to move it where the fire truck can actually hook up to it and has enough room.
Okay, so it's a relocation of an existing fire hydrant?
There is no fire hydrant. They are going to be installing this fire hydrant, but that location is probably going to have to be adjusted so that it will get access for the fire apparatus.
And so none of these site plans, I guess there haven't been site plans for changes within the same use, but for example, like Big George's wouldn't have triggered a site plan review?
Well, the new Big George's would, but when it was at this building, any business that's permitted in the C3 could move in there, and it would not trigger a site plan review, which kicks in the fire hydrant coverage. I will tell you, I've spoken with staff, all of the medical marijuana provisioning centers have gone through hydrant review.
Well, another thing to keep you up at night, how many properties in our commercial districts aren't covered by fire hydrants?
Thanks.
Thanks for that. Commissioner Ackerman. Commissioner Mills.
This is, maybe you answered this earlier, but just want to reiterate since we're talking about fire hydrants. If, with the revision that will come in, that is only talking about the 2,200 square feet in the front of the building, will this fire hydrant still be required?
Yes.
Okay, even though the front of the half of the building is currently covered.
That is correct.
It's because this has to apply to the whole site.
That's correct.
Got it. Have you had any sense from the fire marshal if that strip of stadium were redeveloped, would a fire hydrant be put in the middle, be put there, or would it be put along the road? Like, what is that a reasonable place for a fire hydrant?
I probably can't answer that without looking at where the fire marshal or the engineering department looks at water mains and the maximum coverage. Is it practical there? Possibly not, but this is where it's located to actually meet building coverage.
Okay, I mean, so I'm torn on this, right? Like, there's a lot of things that we include because of the site plan review, and because this is a special use that we give additional scrutiny to this. It's out of how many provisioning centers have we reviewed so far? Please tell us we're close to the limit.
Close.
To date, you have approved 20 special exception uses for provisioning.
All right, we're on a roll. So, out of the 20, like this is, it sounds like 5% so far only have had this problem. But this just is, especially if it is, I can't imagine that a fire hydrant is cheap. And it just seems odd to put it in the middle of the parking lot if that's not where it would make sense. I don't know. So I'm torn, but if that's what our rules call for, then let's not change it. But I just thought I would bring up that just seems odd, similar to our parking.
And to be clear, we do think that there's some possibility that could be shifted based on the fire marshal comments. That was a condition generally that we were pretty comfortable perhaps having you consider leaving to the engineers, as long as a fire hydrant is provided in an appropriate spot that meets the coverage, meets access. That seemed achievable on a staff level. We would like to spend a little bit more time from a traffic and the trip generation count before we just add any sort of conditional approval based on a reduction in footprint. So we could, if I'm hearing that perhaps we're leading towards that postponement, we can make sure to tighten up that detail on that fire hydrant as well before it comes back to you with the additional information.
Sure.
Commissioner Gibrandl?
I just wanted to explain a little bit that they're along our public right-of-ways, but if you need 250 feet around them. So if the polygon of the way the streets work, it doesn't cover the internal stuff, then you've got to have something internal. Yeah.
Thanks.
Commissioner Sauvé.
So one with the fire hydrant for life safety, especially with a restaurant with a large capacity, it does make sense to be able to cover this whole building. So I support that improvement. I don't care if it's the building owner or the tenant, but it does cover life safety. My concern is actually in terms of separating that front building use, access to the additional building space. Looking at the site plan and the floor plan would mean that if there needs to be another access door for another tenant space split up, it looks like it would be in the traffic in that parallel parking in one way between the buildings. So that raises a concern about the additional floor plan use and what egress would mean for that tenant space in between the two projects. So I would request floor plans for that tenant use and a means of egress to understand if they're entering into traffic.
So it sounds like we're moving towards a postponement. Do I have a motion to postpone? Moved by Commissioner Weatherby, seconded by Commissioner Mills. Any further discussion? All those in favor of postponement, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? We are postponed. Moving on to next agenda item 10C, 3005 Packard Road, site plan and special exemption use for City Planning Commission approval. Mr. Chang.
Okay, thank you. This site is located at the northeast corner of Platt and Packard Road. It is Zone C3, which is fringe commercial. Here's a wider look of the aerial. It does have R1C residential zoning to the northeast. Otherwise, it is surrounded by strips of commercial and office. Here's something a little closer of the existing gas station. It's approximately 1,800 square feet. The petition is proposing to remove both the pump canopies and the pump islands, which I'll point out with the arrow so you can see where those pump islands are, and also removing 2 of the 4 curb cuts. The 2 curb cuts that will be removed, the one closest to the intersection on Platt and on Packard. Here you can see the zoning provisioning center map. Again, it is 600 feet away from one of the other provisioning centers, but as you can see how close it is, it would not meet with 1,000. It is 1,000 feet away from public schools, and the underlying green, it's a little difficult to see, but this is Zone C3 and would allow for a provisioning center. Here you can see the photos from the street. This is north off Platt Road, the boundary of the site, so if you're coming off of Platt. Here's one looking south. Again, here's in the corner, the intersection of Platt and Packard. The intersections you can't see from this picture, but they're as close as you can get to this section. You can see the 2 pump islands that will be proposed to be removed. I would also like to mention that it's about an 1,800 square foot building, which requires between 6 and 7 parking spaces. We can discuss that more when we get to the site plans. Again, these are the views of the pumps and the pump islands that will be removed. These are the curb cuts that are also to be closed. These are the ones closest to the intersection of Platt and Packard. Here you can see the existing conditions. It's a little difficult to see where they're going to, you see the existing parking on site where areas will be removed. These are the pump islands that are to be removed. This is what's being proposed, which will make the parking compliant. It's required to have between 6 and 7 spaces. 7 spaces are proposed. Again, you can see additional landscaping, right-of-way landscaping from the site. I did not mention that there will be stormwater detention also on site that's being proposed, so it will be in compliance with storm detention. Staff recommends approval of this special exception use site plan. I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'll now open the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission? If so, please state your name and address for the record. If you are the petitioner, you'll have 5 minutes to speak. If you are here and not a petitioner, you get 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Brian Fenneck. I'm here on behalf of the petitioner. I'm here along with Kyle Gonzalez and Damian Farrell of the Damian Farrell Design Group and Jamie Gurenflo of Niederveld. We just want to thank the Planning Commission for considering this project at this time, given the time constraints and all the work that everyone's put into this. And we'd also like to thank staff for the amount of work that they've put into this as well. This is one that was submitted on the first day, and here we are 20 SEUs in and being heard now. So as you can all see, there's been a lot of work done by everybody on this. So we're here to answer any questions you might have, both on the site plan, on the SEU aspect and the site plan aspect. So thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this?
Hi, my name is Ken Westfall. My wife and I own the 2881 Platt Road parcel, which is immediately north of this, where her dental office is. First, I wanted to mention a little housekeeping item. This document that has some of the comments is inadequate and quite honestly incorrect in some places. So please don't rely on these comments. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through those, but that document's not correct. The ordinance, as we understand it, as was mentioned, has the 600-foot separation distance. And when you measure this out, it comes out to about like 640 feet. Though the ordinance as we read it doesn't actually say how to measure that 600 feet. Is it along the street? Is it door to door? Is it corner to corner of parcels? So there's a lot of ways to measure 600 feet. I don't know how exactly you measure it for this. Also, based on the information on the website, in 2 days, the City Council is going to consider the 1,000-foot revision to this, as I understand it. So this project, would you want to really consider approving something that may be in violation of something that's going to be discussed 2 days from now? A couple of other aspects of this. If you zoom out further from that picture, if you go up to Washtenaw, there are actually 2 more locations along Washtenaw, one existing and one proposed. One of those, actually, I believe you're going to be discussing at your next meeting. This is that map if you go a little further out. So 2 of those are existing, 2 of those are proposed. In this same area, if you think about, hey, what's on every street corner? There's 1 Starbucks. So we could have as many as 4 provisioning centers and 1 Starbucks in that area. If you look at the city, just doing a simple search, we found about 16 Starbucks in the Ann Arbor area, Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti area, and about 20 actual pharmacies. So we're a little confused as to why we would need this many provisioning centers, especially ones that are 640 feet apart in an area. Short on time, our other consideration for us very locally is there's only 4 real parking spot sizes on that plan. 2 are small parkings and 1 is handicap spot. We're concerned that on days when they have a lot of flow through there, people coming along Packard or coming up Platt are going to say, hey, there's no spot available, I'm going to park at the next nearest place. That's Dr. Westfall's office. And 4 days a week, she doesn't have patients, so we're concerned about liability issues of people parking in an empty parking lot and walking to this place because there are inadequate parking, it seems to us, for something that might have a lot of traffic. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission in regards to this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and I will read the motion. And we have 2 motions here that we'll consider at the same time. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby approves the 3005 Packard site plan for Planning Commission for the removal of gas pumps and rearrangement of parking and circulation on the site. Second motion, the Ann Arbor City Planning Commission, after hearing all interested persons and reviewing all relevant information, including an accompanying site plan, finds the petition substantially meet the standards in Chapter 55 zoning ordinance, Section 5:104 special exemption, and Section 5:50.1 regulations concerning medical use of marijuana, and therefore approves the 3005 Packard special exemption use for a medical marijuana provisioning center. This approval is based on the following findings. The proposed use will be consistent with the C3 Fringe Commercial District, which provides for commercial activities including retail establishments, offices, and personal services with automobile access. The proposed use will, the proposed use will not adversely impact traffic, pedestrians, bicyclists, circulation, or road intersection based on the location. Packard Road and Platt Road provide access to the site, and the proposed use is consistent with the surrounding uses' traffic impact. 3, through documentation submitted by the petitioner regarding waste disposal, inventory tracking, security, and other methods of operation of the facility, the provisioning center will be operated in a manner that will not have an adverse impact on the neighboring properties or area and will not have a detrimental impact on natural features. The special exemption use approval is based on the following conditions. 1, the petitioner obtaining and maintaining both a state of Michigan medical marijuana license and a City of Ann Arbor medical marijuana permit, and providing documentation to the planning services within 3 years of the City Planning Commission approval of the date of the date of this petition. 2, the petitioner operating a medical marijuana business at this address within 3 years of the City Planning Commission approval date of this petition. 3, the special exemption use may occupy no more than the building's current 1,863 square feet. 4, the petitioner will install all site improvements shown on the 3005 Packard site plan before zoning compliance will be granted for the special exemption use. Do I have a petitioner or a commissioner that will move? Moved by Commissioner Mills, seconded by Commissioner Gabrandal. Discussion. Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for both the petitioner and the neighbor who came out tonight. I just wanted to clarify a couple things on the logic of how the permitting ordinance is structured and then the zoning ordinance. You had a question about the separation between provisioning centers, and the ordinance does specify it's parcel to parcel, so you'll notice that the yellow circles here are going to change in shape depending on the dimensions of that parcel. And I was one of the city council members, and everyone at this table actually recommended to city council that the original ordinance, well, almost every single member of the commission, we have a new commissioner, recommended to city council that the ordinance start with 1,000-foot separation. Unfortunately, depending on your perspective, fortunately or unfortunately, city council didn't take that advice. And we have currently in our zoning code a 600-foot regulation. And while it was probably our original preference that we start with 1,000 feet, that's not how the law is written today, and it's our job to interpret the law as it's written today and decide whether or not these facilities are appropriate against that measure. And while I do appreciate that the timing is frustrating, given that City Council is going to vote on the separation change on Thursday, during the City Council deliberation, it was intentionally made that would not go into effect until October 31st to allow those petitions that have already been working through the pipeline to finish under the expectations and the business planning they had done when they submitted their petition. And I appreciate that this is going to be a change. As someone who represents this area on City Council, I think this beautifies the intersection, and I'd be interested to see elevations. It looks like we have some here, but just based on the landscape plan alone, this is, I think, a lot better for the area than a gas station, and one that's a little bit run down to begin with. I do appreciate that there were specific issues brought up, like parking, but I'm curious to hear if other commissioners have explicit questions about the elevations or the landscaping or the amount of parking or parking being removed. But I just wanted to give that background in terms of the legal framework of what's changing at the City Council table, just so we were all on the same page.
Commissioner Briggs.
So a couple of questions. One, I'm just curious, moving from a gas station to this use, I don't see anything about environmental contamination or cleanup, and I'm curious how that gets handled. I assume there is contamination.
I believe the petitioner has someone here who can speak to that question.
Good evening. Jamie with Niederwald. Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental studies were performed on the site. There is a certain level of inherent contamination on the site. The stormwater system was designed and approved by the city engineers to be a sealed system so that no infiltration will occur through those contaminated soils. Everything else will remain undisturbed and in place. So at this point, there's not any chance that you're going to get infiltration contamination through the stormwater management system.
Okay.
What will you do with the tanks?
What will we do with them? There are two different, gets into the civil engineering portion of things, but my understanding is that there are two separate types of liners, that the containment systems themselves, so the joints between each of the sections and the fittings and all of that are sealed, and then there's two different types of barriers that the tank system itself is wrapped in. There's one that goes underneath it, and then there's a separate one that wraps all the way around the whole system. So you've sort of got three mechanisms that are going to prevent and help seal that system.
That's helpful. I guess this is, it's all in line with our regulations, right?
Well, there were questions that were brought up both by the stormwater management coordinator and the land development coordinator, Peter Steffens, and then we worked through that with both Allison and in the engineering department to make sure that the details, the construction details, were modified in such a way that they very specifically address the wrapping and the two different types of barriers that the city engineers wanted to see.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Weatherby?
And maybe, I think you do have the landscape or the elevations there that might be helpful. So I had some questions about those short white walls. Are those going away that are existing?
Oh, the landscape wall?
Yeah,
Those were to remain.
so the little white walls along the edge of,
Yes.
yeah, those are gonna stay.
Those were to remain. One is altered due to the alteration of the drive. It will be shortened. This location.
Okay. And maybe the elevation there would be,
It's taken inside the parking lot, doesn't show.
okay.
So one of the unique features that the landscape ordinance for landscaping and screening requires for right-of-way is that you have to landscape the landscaping. So in this particular case, not only are the little retaining walls or not, screening walls going to stay, but we've also provided a vegetative screening out in front of those between the back of curb and those walls too. So you're not going to be just looking at those bare walls like you're seeing there. There's actually going to be shrubbery and whatnot that's planted along there.
Okay, right.
Chris, could you go back to the landscape then?
So you can see those numerous little circles that run along the edge of the wall
Or
there.
little
That's what
shrubs
those are.
and things.
Yep.
Okay.
Actually, evergreen shrubs too, so.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think in addition, and I hope your business succeeds and I hope it all works well, I have to agree with the other commissioners that one advantage of this is that this is going to be a nice looking building and it's going to really fix some issues that are there. I know the concern about having too many provisioning centers, and we may get a lot more if it's legalized in the state. They will not all succeed. I hope yours does. But I do think we are enhancing and we are making a lot of these properties better. I think this is one of those cases where I think the proposed use and just in the landscaping and the stormwater is better than what's existing. And it may not be the businesses that everybody wants to see there, but I think for the sort of health of the city, I think it is a better situation than what we have now. And for the health of that intersection, I think it will look nicer. It will be sort of a better place. I'm really happy about the curb cut reductions. I think that's going to be a much safer situation. So I appreciate, I think it looks like a good proposal and a good business. And we don't all like all the businesses that go in a place. I know there are some near my house that I don't appreciate. We have a 7-Eleven. It's a great business, but it's a pain. But, you know, it functions well for a lot of people, and they've upgraded the building. So I think this is going to be the same kind of situation, and I think it looks reasonable.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thanks. Just to clarify one point from Commissioner Weatherby, and one other piece of the permitting regulations is that there's a cap of 28 dispensaries across the city, and that we've already approved 20. So we know that there'll be exactly 8 more to begin with. Whether or not all of those actually go into operation over the next 3 years, which is required for the permitting, we'll see. And how many of them go out of business because there's not market demand, we may find out. In the same way that pharmacies, market has demanded 20 or so, and there are 20 or so in town. So I think time will tell on a lot of this, but we're here to regulate the use of the land and its physical configuration, and I think this is better than the product we have today.
Commissioner Mills.
I agree with everything that was already said. I have a question about the sign on the corner. I noted that the pump covers and the pumps themselves are coming out. I can't quite tell, but from the site plan, is the sign staying? It looks like it is, but that seems odd.
In location only, we're not gonna have a gas station sign outside of it with
Okay.
the numbers and stuff.
Signage is one of those things that goes through a separate permitting.
I know that the signage goes through a separate permitting process, so like we don't typically do it. It's more of a location thing, and it is a gas station sign. I think, yeah, go ahead.
The intention is for there to be some signage at that, at the location as demonstrated on the site plan. Will it be a gas station sign? No. And will it be, it'll have to go through all the appropriate permitting process, but it will be something that is more fitting to the elevation and the plan. It's not going to be something like what has been there and what is currently there.
Got it. Okay. Well, because I know that there's something about some things being grandfathered in, right? Like the Big A by Arborland. Oh. I would hope that this particular sign is not grandfathered in. Does somebody on? Do you know, Chris, how that works? I mean, I don't care what it says, right? Like, I know we can't regulate what signs say, but how does that work?
Well, it's correct that we don't review signs as part of a site plan review. I would probably have to look into this particular sign when they come in because it may have variances. A lot of gas stations, in fact, have received height and setback variances. This one may be such a case. So it runs with the land. If they wanted to use that sign, they could. I'll have to take a wait and see approach on what type of signage they want to install.
Would there be support for adding a motion or adding a condition to the motion that they can't have a gas?
So we provide provisions to allow signage to be maintained and continued in use. Usually that's restricted to just changing the face. You can't alter the structure, you can't move it, you can't enlarge it, etc. In the case of gas stations, we do provide some extra signage square footage, specifically for the cost of fuel. That's an exception above and beyond. So at a minimum, that wouldn't be eligible for this new use. But taking that a step further, I think you could consider adding a condition as if you want to see something specific happen with that sign. As indicated, they're ultimately going to have to seek a sign permit. We do have restrictions on the total number of signage. Anything that they put there is going to cost them on the building from a total square footage perspective. But it would be reasonable if you had a specific goal in mind to perhaps talk with them about removal or at a minimum restricting the size of any sign there.
Thank you. Do you have thoughts?
I do. I would, and in discussing this with the petitioner, obviously, the specifics of a gas station sign are somewhat specific. And so I think that any signage that they would want to install would not go any higher than probably, somewhere around where the per gallon price is right now on that sign. So it definitely wouldn't be as tall as the sign is right now. And their plan is to only have just the first part, just district on, in plain, a font on the sign and nothing more. So if that were something that commission would like to see, that there would be no issue in placing a condition on there that the signage would not extend any higher than, you know, the midway point of the current sign. And, you know, that'd be minimal, or I'm sure, you know, that it passes the permitting process. Which it would have to do anyway. So, I mean, we're not opposed to that, and we understand the, you know, where you're coming from with the thoughts about the sign. I mean, it would be, if you see everything else that's gone into this project, it's not one of those things that, you know, we're not going to go through all that to have a sign that sticks out like a sore thumb and looks tacky.
That's what that's what I assumed. And that's a sweet spot for a sign. But also, like, I know that we have traditionally allowed, or just looking around, it seems like gas stations have different rules. And so I just want to make sure that we get rid of that. So I'm fine with maybe some condition that says whatever signs are allowed, like this sign loses its grandfather status, period. And that it, like, as if it were a new development, they follow the sign ordinances according to that. So they have to remove this sign and obey, and so how about removal of the sign, contingent upon removal of the sign?
I just wanted to be clear. I think that standard would probably result in this sign having to be removed because of, we have requirements that as it gets to a certain height, it has to be set back additionally from the property. So I still think our sign ordinance provides a lot of opportunity for signage, both wall signage, other ground mounted or poles, but it would, I think making that standard, that condition would be reasonable as part of the special exception, but I just want to be clear for both the petition and the planning commission that would likely result in the removal of that sign.
Maybe there's a...
If you can speak.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe there's a sort of a center point, because like you pointed out, that's a sweet spot for a sign. But maybe the condition is that the existing sign in its current form is taken down, but the location is preserved for utilization to conform to current standards.
Well, what I would just suggest is that it conform to current standards. That we gave the variance because for a gas station use, this is no longer a gas station use, and that's why I would say, like, whatever's allowed on the site should be allowed on the site. It's not a gas station anymore.
Doesn't run with the property.
Right. Yeah.
All things considered, that's very reasonable. And if that's what the planning commission thinks is most appropriate in this situation because it is a changing use, then we would have no objection to that.
So while Commissioner Mills comes up with the language, I would like to make a amendment to the motion. I did notice that we don't mention the hours that this is to operate, so I would add number 5 to read, the petitioner will maintain the operating hours of 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Sunday as part of this petition.
If I may address that as well. The only issue we have with that, I believe that the ordinance, the police powers ordinance, contains language that says that a provisioning center may not operate from the hours of 9 p.m. until 7 a.m. We would ask that perhaps you allow 9 p.m., 9 to 9, Monday through Saturday, and then they would shorten their hours on Sunday, 10 to 6 or 10 to 7, something of that nature. So if that would be something that would be...
I think the norm for us has been most recently, and especially on sites that are not adjacent right to residential neighborhoods, has been 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. If other commissioners feel like we should adjust those hours, I'm happy to adjust them, but that's sort of been the norm for the last several petitions that we've looked at and approved.
And
so, Commissioner Briggs?
I'm glad that you mentioned limiting the hours. If I'm looking at the area correctly, there are neighborhoods behind this adjacent to the property. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
So I do think that some limiting of the hours, I mean, consistent with our past behavior.
Okay.
Appropriate.
Other Commissioner Weatherby?
I would like to kind of look, I know we've done the hours on some and not done the hours on others, and I would like it to be consistent with the other ones along that area. So I don't know if we have a record of what those operating hours are. I'd hate to either give an advantage or a disadvantage to one or the other.
And frankly, I've had other petitions that have been approved, and their hours were different than the 8 p.m. closing time. They were allowed to stay open until 9. And then there's also, for whatever reason, perhaps it's because they're downtown, there are some downtown that have been staying open until 10 on certain nights. Again, we understand that, and in fact, that's one thing I wanted to correct on the record, is that the hours of operation in the operating statement did contain hours that I wanted to amend, even if you weren't going to bring it up, because they were just, it was too much. But for the character of that neighborhood and everything else. But I do appreciate Commissioner Weatherby's statement that there are other ones in that area that the hours were not an issue, and they are later than 8 p.m. And also, I would like to, I don't need to remind you all of the hardships involved of trying to change a condition once it's already been approved. That would mean you'd have to see me again. Nobody wants that.
Of course, we'd love to see you.
Well, I appreciate the invite.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
I think we've also looked at the business context too, in terms of the hours of other businesses around it. So it seems that, there's another gas station across the street, and there's a strip mall of different restaurants and things like that. And it seems, in my mind, it's a little bit more part of that context rather than facing a neighborhood. And so I would be open to it being open till 9 because of the business context. And I agree, I think we've been a little bit inconsistent in terms of, putting limits on some and not on others. And I think part of it had to do with the neighbor, the neighbor influence, so.
So if I mean, just again.
No. If commissioners have questions, thank you. Other commissioners have comments on that? While we mull that over, Commissioner Mills, I think you have a number 6 to add.
My proposed amendment number 6 would say 6. The petitioner will remove the existing signage at the corner of Packard and Platt. I don't think I need to add on that they're then following the normal things, right? Because once you remove something.
So I think I would suggest remove the sign, and all signage must be in compliance with current sign regulations.
Great. Thank you for the friendly amendment. And all signage must be in, what did you say?
In compliance with
in compliance with the existing sign ordinance.
Sign regulation.
Okay. Back to the hours. Anyone want to make a suggestion, or have we found what Huron View hours that we approved?
I don't know what we approved. I know what they're advertising. And they're advertising actually much more limited hours than I would have expected. But I don't know what we approved. Okay. They're advertising Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., Sunday, 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. I don't remember. That may be tighter than the bounds we gave them.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine it was.
Yeah. I would suspect it's tighter than the bounds we actually gave them.
Is there commissioners comfortable with extending it to 9 p.m.? Commissioner C, yes. Commissioner Woods.
So someone suggested 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday, Sundays 10 to 6. Does that sound reasonable? Everybody seems to be nodding.
So 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday, 10 to 6 on Sunday. Okay. So that's number 5, hours 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Saturday, Sunday 10 to 6. And then number 6, removing existing signage of Packard and Platt and installing.
And all signage in compliance with.
And
current sign ordinance.
And complying with current sign ordinance. Okay, any further discussion on those two amendments, number 5 and number 6? All those in favor of those amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay. So we're back to the main motion. And I just had a question for staff in regards to parking, as someone in the audience had addressed. Can you discuss the parking a little bit further here?
Sure. Again, it's an 1,800 square foot building, which is existing, and the approximate numbers are between 3 and 4 parking spaces, a min and a max, in that parking district for that type of use. So it comes out, I believe, between 6 and 7, 6 spaces minimum, 7 spaces max. They've demonstrated or shown 7 spaces. So.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Mills.
I'm happy to ask about, there are some, small sizes shown. How does our code typically deal with that? Like, how, do those not count, or is it okay to have?
Yes, you can have small car parking spaces. I want to say off the top of my head, you're allowed 40% of the spaces can be small car. I might be off, maybe it's 35, but I think it's about 40%.
Okay. The other thing that I would suggest is that my read, based on looking at the, what the existing use is that overflow parking is just going to parallel park against the retaining wall generally. I would imagine that's what people do at gas stations now, kind of. I think that there should be space there. So that's where I would imagine, maybe on the curve. I mean, it's not ideal, but that's my sense.
Further discussion? Commissioner Briggs.
So I'll just raise the parking question again. I'm really confused about, this is relatively similar space. I'm just confused how we have such different requirements between the other property, which I know we were basing on 6,000 feet built, but in terms of the square feet that's operating for the space, this is 1,800 feet, and then the other, they're proposing 2,200 feet for the previous petition. And the parking calculations are so dramatically different.
Right. So this one's fairly straightforward, 1,800 square feet, at 3 to 4 spaces. Yeah. The previous one, I'm going to go back and take a look. I think they took the retail as far as 7,000 square feet of retail plus whatever the Wolverine, the brewing company is. But I don't know what they did as far as a warehouse, because a warehouse doesn't require as much parking. So I want to take a look and see if they didn't calculate in the warehouse, or they had 1 space per 1,000, so they only needed 5 or 6 spaces for the warehouse. So I'll double check that for our next meeting.
Okay, great, thanks. And then a question for the petitioner. Obviously, there's a neighboring property that's feeling a little frustrated right now about the concept of parking. And I know we've had discussions around other projects in town that we've there's been discussions about how monitoring will happen if a customer should happen to be parking in a space that's not permitted, for example, in the dental space. How is that monitoring going to happen at this space? What sort of process is going to be used if there are concerns? If you could discuss.
Well, I would just, with the goal of being a good corporate citizen and a good neighbor in mind, which, I don't have to remind anyone here that these are annual licenses and petitions. So, the last thing you want to be is a bad neighbor and a nuisance. The voluntary policing, both on the the issue of customers, how they come and go when they're not parking, and what they're doing, and are they loitering, and that kind of thing is a major issue, and they have to self-police that. And the parking issue, I completely respect their thoughts about people parking on their property when they're not operating. That's unacceptable, and that'd be unacceptable to the petitioner. And there'd be signage, I would say, probably if there's a retaining wall or somewhere where signage would be appropriate, that they would let people know that any patient parking in adjacent properties would be subject to, they would be towed, things of that nature. Or if they see people doing that, if they see somebody parked, where they shouldn't be, because I don't need to remind you guys of the amount of cameras on the exterior of the building. If they see someone parked where they shouldn't be and they come in and say, hey, pardon me, could you please move your vehicle? We don't want people parking there. That's the safety, security, quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood, the patients, and the employees is job one, and that includes people parking on other people's property and not allowing for that, and self-policing that.
Great, thank you. I hope that alleviates at least a little bit of the concern from the neighboring property in terms of feeling like there's a lot more. So not to get into back and forth, but as was sort of just mentioned, there are a lot of cameras. So and also, since this is an annual permitting process, there's a lot of opportunity for you to provide feedback as opposed to any other business, potential neighboring business, but just in.
And I would also like to add, it's a very lengthy operating statement, and part of that is because they're very thorough and take every aspect into account. There will be, and it might be something that might be glossed over by anybody who's not really looking into the fine details, but there will be on-site security staff inside the building that will be monitoring cameras at all times as people enter and leave the facility as well. So they're going to be watching on that camera, and the first person they're going to talk to when they come in is going to be the person to tell them to move their car.
There's just one other point that I'll point out as well with regard to proximity of available parking off-street. Immediately adjacent to this, to the east, there's a commercial development that is parking all along the front of that building. So it's much more likely that somebody's going to park there and walk on the pavement and sidewalk up to the front of the building, as opposed to walking all the way up the block and parking in the parking lot up on the north end of the site, and then walking down to it when it's much closer to just park next door.
So those are my only comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Sauvé.
I would just like a clarification because of that adjacent parking and the pedestrian path that's going from the current sidewalk to the property. Can I just get a clarification? Is that just painted on the existing asphalt?
Yes.
Okay. But it'll be demarcated, so it's clearly articulated, so we don't have
correct
traffic going through. I would just voice that, yes, this is a significant improvement to the property for what these special exceptions require, and so I really appreciate the effort going into it. And so considering, pedestrian safety and signage improvements and things, thank you.
Are we ready for a vote? All right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on to our next agenda item, audience participation, number 11. Persons in the audience may speak to the Planning Commission on any item for up to 3 minutes. Anyone?
Alicia Westfall, 2881 Platte Road, Ann Arbor, Michigan, neighbor to the petition that was just approved. My husband brought up some salient points. I did speak to the petitioner's representative on the phone. Some of the things that were, put into the comments, that it did strike me as odd that I got no say in anything that was put on a public website that I had said to somebody in a private conversation. So I find that odd. The security issues, obviously he has addressed that per the petition, that these sites are very secure. I had a question about the fact that he told me, at least it was, I remembered in the conversation, that there was only one egress into the building. On the site plan, we see that there's 2. There's always going to be staff that are there, and with the amount of parking that's there, if there's somebody on site monitoring security, somebody I'm assuming being a salesperson or something to that effect, or a counselor, those take up spaces. So it seems to me like the parking is very limited from that perspective. My business is a business and it operates until 7 p.m. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So there are times when we are not there because I have long hours to accommodate families. I do not work a 5-day schedule like some dentists do, so that I can have families come. So we are not there at times, Thursday through Sunday. And if these hours are that prolonged, and we don't have the opportunity to have cameras and things like that to monitor who's coming in and out of our parking lot, and that is a concern for me. From a security standpoint, because if this turns into, which I assume it will, someday, possibly going from a medical dispensary to recreational use, I don't completely understand the complexities of that clientele versus the medical one, and what that's going to mean as an implication to me as a business. And furthermore, as my property taxes that I pay a hideous amount of are going to only increase over time, and at some point I would like to retire in 20 years, what will this do to my resale value? You talk about the beauty of what they're going to do to the property. This is a much different process than we went through several years back personally, when we took an abandoned building that was completely overgrown and overrun, and we were almost the public scourge for me putting a dental office in that looked like a house. So that's why we're kind of taken aback from all this praise about the beauty of this, taking it from a gas station, which it is, and improvements, which it will, no doubt, look better than what it does right now. But, you know, it's just a very different vibe that we're getting for what we try to do, for what this is, with very little, you know, communication. As being a good neighbor, there was nothing. I had to reach out to them. I didn't even understand I was talking to the petitioner's representative rather than you folks at planning. That was not clear on any of the postcards that went out. So that was extremely frustrating from my perspective, because I really feel that there was not any kind of input to let us know that this was happening, especially when there's one across the street that we can see at Packard. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission?
Good evening, Brian Fennick once again. Just to clarify one issue, a statement was made that I asserted that there would only be one method of egress and ingress into the facility. And I recall the conversation clearly, and what I stated was that there would be one mode of egress and ingress into the parking lot, because the other two curb cuts are being closed off. So just to clarify that, but beyond that, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the Planning Commission? All right, seeing no one, we're moving on to Commission Proposed Business. Any Commission Proposed Business? Commissioner Ackerman.
We have, from time to time, gotten feedback on postcards that we send out. Could we maybe add a work session agenda item to maybe review what the contents of those different postcards are, and perhaps give input into how they could be improved to better facilitate clear communication with affected neighbors? Thank you.
Thank you. Any Commissioner Woods?
I just want to thank the speakers for coming and talking with us, and I also just want to reiterate that I think Councilmember Ackerman represents that ward, if I'm not mistaken.
For now.
Okay. But, you know, certainly that's one way that you can make sure that you have your voices heard as well. And the petitioner's representative left, but I was going to suggest that you get his number on speed dial, because folks do need to be good neighbors. And when it's not happening, you know, you just have to keep telling them about it. And the more that the city staff hears from the neighbors that it's not working out, then that's how things will change. So again, thanks for coming too.
If I could just quickly, I responded in jest to Commissioner Wood's statement, but yes, I do represent your business, and if there are issues and their behavior is not what was stated tonight on the record or in line with what we approved, please reach out. I have a direct line into the Chief of Police, so we can work through issues quickly.
Okay. Thank you. Any other Commission Proposed Business? Do you have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Weatherby, seconded by Commissioner Mills. We are adjourned. Thank you.